The female protagonist came to her senses in a wedding gown, bouquet in hand, and froze when she met the groom's serious gaze. In that instant, her memories returned and she realized the horrifying truth. She was Lady Natalia, the villain's wife, a minor character fated to die. The shock deepened when she recognized the world itself as the world of Edingle, a massively popular novel she had loved. It was a story centered on 4 great warriors with extraordinary powers, intense battles, and youthful conflict, but also featured a terrifying villain who stood in the hero's path. Being reincarnated as the villain's wife alone was bad enough, but knowing she was destined to die made it unbearable. She despaired at having become a one-line character doomed to be killed, questioning why her memories had returned on her wedding day, far too late to prevent the marriage. Though the bride had collapsed, the political noble ceremony continued without pause, unable to be cancelled. Overwhelmed, she refused to accept dying young again, especially after realizing both she and her groom were only 7-year-old children, wondering if someone so young could truly become the villain she feared. She decided survival meant avoiding offense at all costs. This life at least offered wealth and luxury, and she vowed to live long. Her parents' cold warning made it clear she was merely a bargaining chip. Swallowing everything, she walked toward Klaus Nelt, the boy who would one day kill her. And as they exchanged vows, invisible chains seemed to close around her. Hours later, she collapsed onto the marital bed, exhausted. Weddings are brutal, corsets hurt, smiling is torture. A knock, she called out, the door opened, and there stood Klaus, clothes flecked with fresh blood. Panic exploded inside her chest. First night? He's already going to? But the novel said the murder happened when they were adults. Still safey, surely. Then Klaus pinned her to the mattress, knife at her throat. She choked out a silent scream. A heartbeat later, he released her, stepped back, and muttered an apology. He knew she didn't want him close. He would keep his distance as much as possible. But his uncle was watching, so he had to spend the night in the room. Confusion replaced terror. She recalled the adult Klaus from the novel, the ruthless villain who acted on his whims and plotted the end of the world, and wondered if the quiet child before her could truly become that man. Seeing young Klaus sleeping uncomfortably on the couch, she urged him to use the bed, reasoning that they were just children and there was no need to sleep separately. Though he hesitated, worried she might feel uneasy, she reassured him. Klaus thanked her shyly, clearly moved, which made her suspect there was more to his situation than she understood. When they held hands and fell asleep together, she realized it wasn't a big deal at all. Waking to Klaus's gentle smile and gratitude, she found him unbearably cute and completely different from the villain she remembered, wondering how such a child could ever turn out that way. A narration introduced Klaus Nelt, the only son of the powerful Nelt family, one of the 4 great houses, known for their inherited dark powers that allowed shadow manipulation and mental interference. In the original story, their ambition for world domination led them to clash with the protagonist, ending in the villain's defeat. Later, she awoke to find Klaus missing and met Mary, a maid assigned to her care. Determined to build allies, she followed Mary to breakfast and learned of Klaus's brutal daily routine, starting training at dawn and studying until midnight. Horrified that a 7-year-old lived like this, she insisted it had to stop, only to learn his uncle, the family head, would never allow it. Arriving late to breakfast, she met the uncle, who coldly mocked her kindness toward Klaus and hinted that if she knew the truth, she wouldn't treat her husband so warmly. Natalia was shaken by the uncle's cryptic words about the truth. But before she could press further, Klaus gently urged her to eat before the food grew cold. Watching him, she felt certain he was nothing like the ruthless villain from the novel, though she couldn't yet understand why. The uncle seemed to sense that difference as well, then abruptly stood up, sneering that eating with them made him sick. Announcing he would be leaving for a while, he coldly ordered Klaus to continue his training in the meantime. Klaus bowed his head and apologized without protest. Outraged by the uncle's domineering attitude, Natalia realized the power imbalance at play. With Klaus's parents dead, Klaus was the rightful heir of the Nelt family, meaning his uncle held authority only as a guardian. She urged Klaus to be more assertive, reminding him that he was the most important person in the household. Klaus nervously denied it, insisting he merely happened to be the heir. A belief Natalia immediately recognized as something his uncle must have drilled into him. She became convinced the uncle was actively tormenting and suppressing Klaus. At the same time, Natalia felt trapped by fear. In the original story, Klaus's wife had a terrible relationship with him, eventually provoking his wrath and dying. A fate Natalia was desperate to avoid. Yet she didn't know what had caused that breakdown or how to change it, making every action feel like it could trigger a death flag. When Klaus shyly admitted he was simply happy to be eating with her, her resolve wavered. He was painfully kind and innocent, far too cute to resemble the future villain. Still, she knew she needed answers. She secretly observed Klaus's training and was horrified. His uncle forced him to fight while holding a short blade against a longsword, demanding he live up to his father's legacy, who had supposedly done the same. To Natalia, it was blatantly impossible. No child could overcome an adult's strength like that. Even when the session ended, Klaus politely thanked his uncle. Matters grew worse when a maid casually handed Klaus a box and told him to tend to his own wounds as usual. Furious, Natalia rushed to his side and took him away. As she treated his injuries, she encouraged Klaus to act like the master of the house. He hesitated, then almost confessed something devastating, that his parents' deaths were his fault. Before abruptly changing the subject, the look on his face confirmed Natalia's suspicions that there was a hidden truth she hadn't uncovered yet. Seizing her chance while the uncle was away, Natalia summoned Mary and questioned her about Klaus's parents. At first, Mary only said they were dead, but eventually revealed what she had heard, that Klaus's powers had gone out of control and caused their deaths. Shocked, Natalia pressed further and learned that this story came directly from the head of the family, Klaus's uncle. No one had witnessed the incident, and after the funeral, all the servants had been replaced under the uncle's orders. Klaus himself had fallen into shock, developed a fever, and lost all memory surrounding the event, waking up only to learn his parents were gone. Natalia immediately sensed something was wrong. In the original novel, Klaus's parents had died in an accident, and their deaths were reported by the imperial family, not blamed on Klaus. The only person who could have altered the narrative and reported it differently was his uncle. Suddenly, everything made sense. Even Natalia's marriage felt calculated. She came from a weak, low-ranking noble family with no influence, ensuring Klaus would gain no support through her. It was the perfect setup to strip him of power and turn him into a puppet, while the uncle positioned himself as the true ruler of the dukedom. Furious but resolute, Natalia swore she would not allow it. She would protect Klaus and dismantle his uncle's control. Just as Mary returned with something Natalia had requested, shouting erupted nearby. The uncle had come back and was berating Klaus, calling him a disgrace and cruelly blaming him for his father's death. Klaus collapsed in tears, apologizing again and again, until Natalia stepped in front of him. Klaus looked up in stunned surprise as she confronted the uncle head-on. Natalia boldly confronted Klaus's uncle, sharply questioning what he thought he was doing and sarcastically remarking that, from the looks of it, they were supposedly in a swordsmanship lesson. She clarified that her real question was what he was doing to Lord Klaus, the rightful head of the Nelt family. When the uncle scoffed and tried to justify himself under the guise of training, Natalia cut him off, accusing him of delivering nothing but a one-sided assault rather than proper guidance. She then asked if he even knew her maiden name. When she introduced herself as Natalia Henrik, the uncle was visibly shaken. Taking up a sword, she explained that Henrik the Sword was an ancestral mage and legendary swordsman, and that as a member of the Henrik family, she had been trained in swordsmanship since childhood. Before he could react, she launched a swift attack, disarming him with ease. She coldly criticized his poor form, his loose grip, unstable stance, and sloppy technique, leaving him groaning on the ground. Standing over him, she mocked his incompetence, questioning how someone like him could dare instruct the head of a ducal house. When he begged her to stop, she calmly introduced herself again, this time as Natalia Nelt, wife of Klaus Nelt, head of the Nelt family. Natalia declared that with the acting head absent, all authority belonged to Klaus and herself. Faced with her resolve, the uncle panicked and begged forgiveness, promising never to repeat his actions. Natalia rejected his apology outright. She ordered nearby servants to remove him, threatening to dismiss them as well if they hesitated. Desperate and humiliated, the uncle was dragged away despite his pleas. Afterward, Klaus apologized weakly, blaming himself. Natalia gently cupped his face and reassured him that none of it was his fault, not because he was weak or afraid, but because there was a true culprit behind everything. She promised she would deal with that person herself. Klaus looked at her with gratitude, leaving Natalia once again struck by how gentle and pure he was, wondering how such a child could ever become a villain. Taking his hand, she led him away to tend to his injuries. That evening, Natalia arranged a lavish supper, cheerfully announcing that they would enjoy a proper meal. She revealed that Mary had told her Klaus was often deliberately given spoiled food, something she found unforgivable. Encouraging him to eat without fear, she promised that anyone who reported it to his uncle would be fired. Klaus cautiously tasted the food and was surprised by how delicious it was, smiling shyly as Natalia praised him. As they ate, Klaus confessed that people disliked him and that he believed himself a failure at controlling his powers. Holding his hand, Natalia assured him that he would learn in time and that the hostility around him was the result of his uncle's manipulation, not genuine hatred. When Klaus asked if she hated him too, she smiled warmly and told him she never could. Touched to tears, Klaus looked at her with open trust, making Natalia wish she could protect that smile forever. A few days later, the uncle returned and immediately sensed something was wrong. The servants were unfamiliar, and Klaus greeted him calmly. When he questioned Klaus about his training and threatened to verify it with his instructor, Klaus replied that he no longer had one. Natalia then appeared, coolly announcing that she had fired the instructor herself. Stunned, the uncle demanded to know what authority she had. Natalia met his glare with a confident smile and turned the question back on him, firmly asserting her power within the Nelt household. She boldly confronted Klaus's uncle, demanding to know by what authority he had wrongfully abused Klaus. The uncle pretended ignorance, dismissing her accusation as nonsense, yet inwardly he was unsettled. He couldn't understand why this child was daring to oppose him, especially when he had deliberately married Klaus off to someone he believed would never challenge his control. When she pressed him again and he mocked her as ridiculous, she calmly challenged him to let her prove everything. To his shock, she had Klaus's former mentor dragged in, bound and helpless. Recognizing him, the uncle demanded to know what was going on. She coolly explained that although she had fired the mentor, he still had an important role left to play. With an ominous smile, she suggested they begin their fun show, which only enraged the uncle further. He accused her of thinking she could get away with such insolence, but she stepped closer, unbothered, and declared that there was no problem at all. Everything she was doing was for Klaus's sake. She made it clear that Klaus, not the uncle, was the true head of the house, and that she was simply removing what was unnecessary. The uncle was left stunned. She then revealed that they had already interviewed the servants and uncovered the truth about his deep-seated inferiority complex toward his older brother, Klaus's father. As the second son of a prestigious family, he had lived in his brother's shadow, especially because he alone failed to awaken the Nelt family's power while his brilliant elder brother succeeded. Now, faced with Klaus, a talented young man who closely resembled that brother and was already showing signs of awakening power, the uncle's resentment had resurfaced, driving him to relentlessly bully Klaus. No matter how much he had suffered, she stated firmly, none of it justified what he had done to Klaus. She then questioned whether he was curious about why she had brought in a guidance counselor she had already dismissed. The reason, she explained, was simple. She needed him to perform one last task, giving full testimony. As she approached the uncle, she asked why he looked so frightened. If he had truly done nothing wrong, then listening should not have been a problem. Turning to the restrained mentor, she asked him to explain what work he had been assigned. After a tense pause, the mentor confessed that he had been ordered to deliberately discourage Lord Klaus, teaching him incorrectly, verbally abusing him, and crushing his spirit. The uncle erupted, calling it complete nonsense and demanding to know what benefit such actions would bring him. She immediately exposed his true intention. He wanted to turn Klaus into a controllable puppet and seize control of the Nelt family by destroying Klaus's self-confidence and burdening him with guilt, ensuring he could never stand on his own. Hearing this, Klaus quietly repeated the word, guilty. Visibly shaken, the uncle frantically denied everything, insisting she couldn't possibly believe such accusations based on one person's words. She agreed calmly, stating she wouldn't rely on a single testimony. Thinking he had gained the upper hand, the uncle relaxed, until she summoned more witnesses. A group of former servants entered, leaving him stunned. She explained that these were the servants he had unfairly dismissed after the former Duke and Duchess died. When he demanded to know why they were there, she revealed that Mary had helped her find them. The uncle protested, claiming their dismissal had been justified, but she cut him off, accusing him of committing the worst possible crime. When he claimed ignorance again, she called in one final witness, the former Duke and Duchess's personal doctor. The uncle was completely shaken. She asked the doctor to explain how Klaus's parents had truly died. Overhearing this, Klaus broke down in shock, questioning whether his parents' deaths were connected to him, while the uncle shouted in desperate denial that it was impossible, ignoring the uncle's furious outburst. Turning to Natalia, the doctor agreed to tell Klaus the full truth. He instructed Klaus to listen carefully and revealed that his parents had died in an accident. Stunned, Klaus asked if it was truly an accident, and the doctor explained that on a rainy night, while returning home late in their carriage, both parents, exhausted, fell asleep, causing the carriage to overturn. Hearing this, Klaus hesitantly asked if it meant their deaths were not his fault. The doctor firmly confirmed it, explaining that Klaus had fainted from shock upon hearing the news back then. Natalia then presented official documents, the death certificate clearly stating, death in a carriage accident, followed by another paper, a letter of resignation stripping the uncle of his position as acting head of the family. When the uncle stammered in disbelief, she clarified that everything he had done had already been reported to the emperor, and this royal decree was the result. She ordered him to return to his residence immediately. Guards rushed in and dragged the uncle away as he struggled and protested his innocence. The guard added that evidence showed the uncle had repeatedly visited the road in question, personally arranged the carriage driver, and that the individual hired to tamper with the road had already been identified. Overwhelmed, Klaus asked in disbelief if his uncle had really killed his parents. Natalia gently acknowledged how shocking the truth must be. At that moment, the uncle glared at her with pure hatred, muttering that none of this would have happened if she weren't there. Suddenly, dark power erupted around him, throwing him violently to the ground. Natalia froze in horror, realizing he had lied about being powerless. His ability was awakening right then. Screaming in rage, the uncle lunged at her, intent on killing her. Before Natalia could react, Klaus stepped in front of her to shield her, even though he hadn't yet learned to control his powers. Panicking, Natalia cried out, terrified of what would happen if the attack struck him. The dark power slammed into Klaus, sending him flying. She screamed his name and rushed toward him. But before she could reach him, Klaus's own dark power surged uncontrollably. Rising amid the swirling energy, Klaus struck back, hurling the uncle across the room. Natalia begged him to stop, but Klaus, overwhelmed by rage and power, continued attacking. As Klaus looked at her, Natalia realized with dread that his ability was unlike anything seen before, perhaps the strongest in history. If he lost control completely, he would kill his uncle. No matter how despicable the man was, Klaus could not be allowed to become a killer, especially when the full truth about his parents still needed to be uncovered. Slowly, the dark power subsided, collapsing inward until the room fell silent, leaving the uncle unconscious on the floor. Once calm returned, Klaus anxiously asked if Natalia was hurt. She smiled reassuringly, telling him she was fine thanks to him, and Klaus visibly relaxed in relief. Later, the doctor examined Klaus as he slept in bed and informed Natalia that there was no serious issue. Klaus had simply awakened his abilities too suddenly, placing immense strain on his body, but he would recover and wake soon. Hearing this, Natalia finally let herself relax, trembling with relief as the weight of everything that had happened began to settle. Natalia firmly told herself never to regret what she had done. If things had continued as they were, Klaus would have grown up under his uncle's cruelty, burdened by fear and manipulation. Apologizing silently in her heart, she resolved to protect her little Klaus no matter what. When Klaus looked up at her and softly thanked her, she felt reassured. As long as she protected him, he would be grateful, and hopefully never turn against her. Still, she reminded herself that life was unpredictable, and if a sudden plot twist emerged, they needed to be ready to leave immediately. She gently checked on Klaus as he slept, calling his name. He soon woke, confused, and she explained that he was in their room and had collapsed earlier. As his memory returned, Klaus anxiously asked whether she had been hurt. Natalia reassured him with a smile that she was perfectly fine. Klaus let out a deep sigh of relief, admitting that he had been terrified she might leave him. Holding her hand tightly, he vowed that he would grow strong enough to earn her approval. Natalia was flustered by his earnest declaration. He was only 7, yet she couldn't help feeling her heart flutter, thinking that even as a future villain, Klaus was undeniably good-looking. When he smiled brightly at her, she told him not to worry. Everyone already recognized him as the true head of the family now that his powers had awakened. Klaus blushed but clarified that it wasn't public recognition he wanted. It was her approval. Caught off guard, she told him she hoped he would grow stronger, and Klaus eagerly promised to do his best. Overwhelmed by how adorable he was, Natalia covered her face, thinking his smile was almost too bright to handle. Remembering something important, she asked Klaus to listen carefully. She told him that she had officially rehired the servants who once served his parents, and they all wished to greet him once things settled. Klaus grew emotional at the mention of his father and mother, silently repeating their names before thanking Natalia with tears in his eyes. A few days later, the mansion felt alive again, restored to its former beauty. Klaus smiled more often, and under Natalia's guidance, he began learning swordsmanship, believing it would make him stronger. Watching him train with determination, Natalia quietly wished he could remain this way forever and never walk the path of a villain. During practice, Klaus suddenly asked what she had just said, but before she could answer, a servant interrupted, announcing that Klaus had visitors. Natalia was surprised. Soon, a man and woman arrived, casually commenting on how delicious the Duke's tea was compared to their own. Klaus politely thanked them for coming, saying he hadn't expected his parents to visit. The man claimed he had heard about the recent incident and was worried, adding that he was relieved Natalia was unharmed. Natalia immediately saw through the act, thinking how obvious he was. She realized these people didn't truly care about her. Their concern was fake. They were there for another reason entirely. When the man explained that the acting head of the family was gone and Klaus must be struggling without adult guidance, offering his help, Natalia felt a chill run down her spine. She instantly understood his real intention. He was trying to take over the Nelt family. As he smiled and repeated his offer to help, Natalia felt horrified. With Klaus's uncle gone, there were no adult figures left besides the servants, and under the guise of support, these people planned to turn Klaus into a puppet. Watching them laugh lightly, Natalia realized they were plotting to seize control of the Nelt household without hesitation, even though it was their daughter's marital home. To them, it didn't matter at all. Disgust welled up inside her, and she felt an intense hatred toward them. A memory flashed through her mind, herself at 5 years old, standing small and humiliated as her father scolded her for her poor swordsmanship. He accused her of tarnishing the Henrik family name and harshly compared her to Jack, who trained diligently beside them. The young Natalia stood there, embarrassed and hurt, the sting of those words still lingering deep within her heart. Natalia stood small and humiliated as her father scolded her harshly, declaring that the Henrik family had no use for anyone who wasn't a genius. When her brother Jack tried to defend her, saying she was still young and couldn't yet match his level, their father angrily silenced him and demanded obedience. With her head lowered, Natalia quietly agreed, swallowing her shame. Years later, she woke in the middle of the night feeling thirsty and overheard voices downstairs. Her father was speaking coldly, stating that she had no talent. Hidden in the dark, she listened as he complained that even marrying her off would be disgraceful if she couldn't wield a sword. Her mother dismissed the concern, saying it didn't matter because she was just a girl. Her father then bluntly agreed, explaining that they would simply use her as a pawn to restore the family's declining status. In that moment, Natalia realized something far worse than lack of affection. They didn't even see her as a person. To them, she was nothing more than a convenient tool. Even her sword training hadn't been for her sake, but merely to avoid ridicule toward the Henrik family for having a useless daughter. From the moment she was born, she understood her fate had been decided as a political bargaining chip. Snapped out of her memories by Klaus calling her name, Natalia forced herself to stay composed. Klaus gently touched her face and smiled before formally thanking her parents for their concern. With unexpected firmness, he stated that they did not need assistance and were perfectly capable of managing on their own. Natalia's father was taken aback. This wasn't how things were supposed to go. Klaus had been expected to be a spineless puppet hiding behind his uncle, someone who would obediently accept any interference. Trying another approach, her father turned to Natalia, insisting she would feel more comfortable if her parents stayed, claiming she was still young enough to miss them. Natalia was about to deny it, but Klaus calmly interrupted, saying it was fine. Wrapping an arm around her, he smiled confidently and declared that Natalia had him, so there was no need for her parents to worry. Touched, Natalia watched as Klaus politely but firmly asked them to leave. Though shocked, her parents quickly masked their expressions and agreed to withdraw, for now. As they departed, her father cast her a venomous glare and warned her not to think it was over. Natalia stood her ground. Later that night, her father raged in private, smashing a mug and cursing Klaus for daring to defy him. He realized he needed to act before Jack returned. Though marrying Natalia had brought in money, it wasn't enough. The Duke's family was wealthy, and there had to be more to take. Recalling Klaus's obvious attachment to Natalia, he smirked, deciding she might still be useful. Days passed without incident, but Natalia knew her parents wouldn't give up so easily. As she wondered what they were plotting, a sudden grip seized her arm. She turned to find her father standing before her. When she demanded how he had gotten inside, he casually explained that the guards were no challenge for someone with his swordsmanship, gesturing to an unconscious guard nearby. Smiling coldly, he told her he wanted her cooperation. Since the young lord listened to her, he expected her to use that influence. Instantly, Natalia realized his plan, to manipulate Klaus through her. She refused without hesitation. Shocked, her father demanded an explanation. Natalia finally spoke the truth she had long buried. The real reason their family fell into ruin was his obsession with swordsmanship while being utterly incompetent at everything else. Estate management, social relations, and leadership. She declared that he was the one who was truly incompetent and told him to reflect on himself before blaming others. Natalia's father exploded in rage at her refusal, screaming that she dared not speak to her father that way. Though she flinched, she did not back down. Suddenly, an unfamiliar pressure filled the air as dark power surged around him, and he cried out in shock, unable to understand what was happening. From the shadows beneath the crescent moon, Klaus appeared, his presence overwhelming as dark power coiled around him. Natalia gasped his name. Klaus fixed a cold glare on her father and demanded to know what he thought he was doing to his wife. The man froze, stammering in disbelief, unable to comprehend the power before him. As Klaus advanced, he calmly pointed out the raised hand, asking whether he had been about to strike Natalia. Panicking, her father claimed it was all a misunderstanding. Desperate, he turned to Natalia, shouting for her to help him and asking why she wouldn't say anything while her father was in danger. Natalia met his gaze with icy calm and asked if he truly believed she would defend him. When he demanded whether she even remembered who had raised her, she answered without hesitation that she did, and that it was the man who had treated her as nothing more than a convenient tool. Enraged, he shouted about her disrespectful attitude, but before he could continue, Klaus stepped in front of her. With cutting contempt, Klaus remarked that even animals could give birth to children, but if her father had wanted gratitude, he should have shown her love. When the man insisted they had raised her with love and demanded Natalia confirm it, Klaus cut him off sharply, saying he already knew the truth. He exposed how Natalia had been disciplined harshly and treated solely as a pawn for political marriage. Then, producing documents, Klaus revealed something even darker. Her father's involvement in numerous illegal dealings. One by one, Klaus listed the crimes: forged assets, forced labor of citizens, illegal tax collection, and tax evasion. He remarked that it was astonishing the man hadn't been caught sooner, unless his brother had helped conceal the evidence. Shocked, her father demanded how Klaus knew, insisting all proof had been destroyed. Klaus smirked, asking if he truly believed his brother would ever throw away such valuable blackmail material. Klaus went further, accusing him of planning to exploit his wife's family's weaknesses to keep them under his control. The realization shattered Natalia's father. Panic set in as he imagined the consequences if everything became public. Punishment was inevitable. Gritting his teeth, he told himself it was absurd to be cornered by a mere child. Klaus might have recently awakened his powers, but her father trusted his superior swordsmanship. If he killed Klaus and staged it as an accident, Natalia would inherit the headship, and the household would ultimately become his. With a scream, he lunged at Klaus. The attack was effortlessly stopped. Klaus blocked him with dark power and crushed him to the ground, stepping on his chest. Horrified, her father realized he hadn't even seen Klaus's movements. Despite awakening only recently, Klaus had already mastered his abilities. The terrifying thought struck him. Klaus might truly be a genius. Leaning down, Klaus coldly ordered him to step down as head of the house and retire. Trembling, the man refused. But Klaus calmly warned that if he declined, the evidence would be handed to the kingdom, condemning him to spend the rest of his life rotting in prison. With a gentle, almost sweet smile, Klaus posed the final choice: submit quietly and retire, or face judgment and a lifetime behind bars. Klaus calmly presented Natalia's father with a terrifying choice, asking whether he would prefer to quietly retire to an estate that had already been prepared for him. The implication behind those words struck harder than any threat. The older man collapsed to his knees, clutching his head as panic consumed him. A lifetime in prison was clearly not an option, yet living in Klaus's estate meant existing under constant watch, stripped of freedom in all but name. As he glanced up drenched in sweat, he saw the young duke seated peacefully, dark, magical energy coiling around him like a living shadow. In that moment, the man understood the unspoken truth: refusal meant death. Shaking uncontrollably, he stammered out his acceptance. The instant he agreed, Klaus's grim presence vanished, replaced by a bright, cheerful smile. Satisfied, Klaus ordered them to leave at once. With a snap of his fingers, guards moved in and seized Natalia's parents. Her father protested loudly, insisting it was too sudden and that he needed time to prepare. Klaus coldly dismissed his complaints, explaining that the estate was already ready and that his wife was waiting there. As the struggling couple was dragged away, Klaus added casually that the house would be well maintained and that the man's capable son would take over his position. Natalia watched in stunned silence, realizing Klaus knew about her brother all along. Klaus addressed her father again, assuring him that the support he feared losing would now be entrusted to his son. Leaning closer, Klaus whispered with a dark smile that the man should rest peacefully and vanish from public life. As the wind swept through the garden and her parents disappeared, Natalia hesitantly called out Klaus's name. When Klaus turned back to her, the oppressive aura around him dissolved, replaced by an almost comically innocent presence. As if imaginary flowers bloomed around him, he called her name cheerfully and immediately asked if her father had hurt her earlier, concern filling his voice as he checked her condition. Natalia stared at him, momentarily unsettled by how different he seemed. Quickly regaining herself, she smiled and assured him she was fine, then asked how he knew so much about her family. Klaus admitted that he had anticipated trouble the moment her parents arrived and had quietly investigated. In doing so, he learned about her childhood and how she had been treated at home. He apologized for prying into such personal matters, but Natalia gently told him it was all right, adding with a sad smile that her parents had always been that way. Klaus looked at her with genuine sympathy. Under the night sky, he reached out and took her hand, promising that he would be her family from now on and that he would protect her. Moved by his words, Natalia blushed and thanked him sincerely. Elsewhere, in the royal capital of Lungenbrum, nobles discussed rumors about the young head of the Nelt family driving out his wife's parents, noting how much he had changed since marriage despite his age. A silver-haired young man expressed interest to the king, suggesting they summon Klaus. Stroking his beard, the king agreed and ordered an invitation sent to both Klaus and Natalia. Back at the Nelt estate, a flustered butler named Ray interrupted their tea to deliver a sealed letter. Klaus immediately recognized it as correspondence from the royal family. As he read it, his eyes widened. It was an invitation to a royal party. The scene shifted to an image of a grand ballroom as Natalia cried out in disbelief. Noticing something deeply unsettling written within the letter, Natalia stared at the invitation in disbelief, stunned to see that her own name was clearly written alongside Klaus's. Confusion clouded her eyes as she wondered why she, of all people, had been invited. Recalling the original storyline, she remembered that the original Natalia had been selfish, isolated, and infamous for her terrible reputation, someone who never received invitations to social events and barely existed in noble society's awareness. This sudden recognition felt completely out of place. As she thought deeper, Natalia realized she now understood the truth behind Klaus's circumstances. His uncle had deliberately suppressed Klaus's wife, fearing she might gain influence. To keep her powerless and away from society, he had spread malicious rumors and manipulated public opinion. Even their marriage had been arranged purely for his convenience. Given how sensitive nobles and the imperial family were to political relationship, Natalia reasoned that they must have noticed this imbalance long ago. That explained why she had once been ignored. No one saw her as worth paying attention to. Yet the question remained, why had the emperor noticed her now? The answer hit her suddenly. She remembered exposing Klaus's uncle's crimes, openly challenging his excuse of unfair termination. Combined with her own father being forced into retirement, Natalia realized she had been involved in a string of drastic, highly visible events. No wonder public interest had turned toward her. It would have been impossible not to notice. Lost in thought, Natalia stood silently with her back to Klaus, trembling. Sensing her unease, Klaus gently asked if she wanted him to refuse the invitation. He admitted he had no interest in an imperial family party and reassured her that she didn't need to attend if she felt uncomfortable. Natalia reacted instantly, refusing the idea. While she felt her own attendance didn't truly matter, Klaus's presence absolutely did. She recalled the lore of the world of Edingel, where the balance of power revolved around the four great houses, united by the imperial family. The emperor and crown prince were central figures capable of shaping destinies. In the original story, Klaus had been on poor terms with the emperor, a rift that contributed to his fall into villainy. Natalia imagined a different future, one where Klaus formed a good relationship with the imperial family, making it easier to break free from that dark fate. With that resolve, she decided she would attend the party with him. Though Klaus assured her there was no pressure, Natalia quickly brushed it off, claiming she was simply surprised such an esteemed place would invite a lowly noble like her. Klaus studied her closely before finally agreeing. Suddenly brightening, he announced they should prepare her dress. Natalia froze, realizing she owned nothing suitable for a royal party. Klaus's uncle had treated her like a pawn, leaving her with only plain, everyday clothing, and her parents' belongings were far too shabby to use. Klaus placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder and promised to handle everything, and though the silent pressure weighed on her, she agreed. A few days later, Natalia found herself inside a grand atelier, staring in awe at rows of dazzling dresses. A stylish woman with orange hair confidently introduced herself as Marilyn, a legendary dress designer whose works were so popular she had been booked for years. Natalia was shocked. Someone of Marilyn's status shouldn't have been so easy to invite. Klaus sheepishly admitted he used money, casually flexing the Nelt family's immense wealth. Natalia was left speechless as Klaus went further, boldly requesting at least 100 dresses. Horrified, she protested, only for Klaus to point out their massive mansion could easily store them. Reminding her that she was now the wife of the Nelt family head, Klaus insisted she needed to look her best. Natalia reluctantly agreed, until Klaus blushed and admitted the real reason. He simply wanted to see her wearing many different dresses. Flustered and shouting his name, Natalia watched as Klaus cheerfully walked away, leaving Marilyn tightening her measuring tape and preparing to begin. Natalia could only nod nervously in agreement as Marilyn measured every possible detail with fierce focus. Nearby, Klaus sat calmly sipping tea, reminding himself to relax while watching the process unfold, declaring that she was feeling inspired. Once she finished, she burst into laughter, wished them a good day, and strutted out with dramatic flair. Klaus waved cheerfully after her, while Natalia slumped weakly in her chair, completely drained by Marilyn's intense energy. Still trembling, Natalia wondered if Marilyn truly intended to make 100 dresses. The sheer cost terrified her. Fine dresses were expensive, and she quietly hoped Klaus wouldn't come to regret such an extravagant decision. As her thoughts spiraled, she began worrying about the future. Klaus liked her now, but what if that changed? In the original story, Klaus was never with his wife Natalia. The realization struck her hard, and panic followed. She imagined having to leave the estate to avoid her doomed fate, only to be burdened with an impossible debt for the dresses. Klaus snapped her out of her thoughts by calling her name. Beaming with excitement and practically sparkling, he confessed that he was really looking forward to seeing how the dresses would turn out. Natalia blushed, struck by how adorable his genuine enthusiasm was. Watching his happy expression, she decided that the cost no longer mattered. Klaus was simply too cute, though a lingering question remained in her mind: when would things start to go wrong? Some time later, they arrived at the Imperial Palace, where a grand party was already underway. The magnificent venue left Natalia awestruck as guests mingled beneath glittering lights. As she and Klaus entered, whispers followed them, praising their appearance and noting that it was only natural for guests of the imperial family to look so impressive. Natalia stole a glance at Klaus and internally squealed, overwhelmed by how stunning he looked. Klaus leaned in and softly told her that, more importantly, the dress suited her beautifully. He met her eyes and sincerely declared that she was the most beautiful person in the room, blushing slightly as he said it. Natalia thanked him shyly, though privately she thought Klaus himself was even more beautiful than usual. The atmosphere shifted as murmurs rippled through the crowd. The royal family had arrived. Natalia watched wide-eyed as the emperor and empress entered with regal grace, followed by a silver-haired young man whose presence radiated power. She immediately recognized him as Warren Eddingle, a central figure in the world's lore, someone capable of standing against the four great houses themselves. Images from the world of Eddingle flashed through her mind. A story centered on battles born from special abilities possessed by the four dukes, all overseen by the imperial family. Back in the present, the emperor approached Klaus and Natalia, asking if they were enjoying the party. Klaus bowed politely, thanked him for the invitation, and introduced Natalia as his wife. Nervously trembling, Natalia curtsied and introduced herself. The emperor smiled kindly, expressing hope that the couple would continue to support each other, then excused himself. Moments later, the crown prince approached, greeting Klaus warmly and remarking that he looked well. Klaus returned the greeting with respectful familiarity. The prince noted that it hadn't been long since their wedding, implying it would be concerning if things had already changed. Natalia froze in shock, realizing the crown prince had attended their wedding, an event she barely remembered due to fainting upon realizing she had reincarnated as the villain's doomed wife. As Natalia snapped back to the present, Warren turned his attention fully to her. Feeling the gaze of the world's most powerful reader of fate upon her, she noticed his gentle smile and couldn't help thinking he was cute. Leaning closer, Warren remarked that it was an honor to meet the rumored Duchess. Confused by the word, Natalia listened as he clarified. She was the brave woman who had knocked the acting head of the family out of power and saved Klaus. Blushing deeply, Natalia could only gasp in stunned disbelief. Natalia gasped in disbelief when Warren teased that people were calling her a heroic savior, only for him to burst into laughter and admit he was joking. Leaning closer, his tone softened as he confided that the truth, her role in driving out the acting head of the family, was known only to the two of them. He explained that when her family's letter first arrived, he never expected it to accuse someone so outwardly respectable. He was surprised she believed such a letter would work, especially since he himself was still seen as a child. The acting head had maintained a flawless public image, which was why his abusive class had never surfaced. Warren revealed that while many dismissed the letter as childish nonsense, he sensed something deeper. Despite evidence that could have denied the claims, her words were filled with urgency and desperation. From that alone, he realized she had been trying to protect Klaus. Natalia flushed, covering her mouth as she realized how transparent her feelings had been, inwardly grumbling that Klaus's cuteness had betrayed her resolve. Raising his champagne glass, Warren proposed a toast to her courage and praised her sharp mind, leaving her blushing even more as she accepted. Klaus soon joined them, clearly displeased by their closeness. Warren noticed immediately and teased him about being jealous. Klaus shot back defensively, sparks of rivalry crackling between them. Laughing, Warren remarked that Klaus and his wife seemed genuinely close and that he was glad to see so many different sides of Klaus that night. His expression softened as he recalled how Klaus used to constantly punish himself, to which Klaus admitted that he had done so just to survive. Watching them, Natalia felt her heart swell and silently vowed to keep helping Klaus show the world every side of himself. Deciding he had seen enough, Warren concluded that Klaus had found a good match and excused himself, wishing them a pleasant evening. Natalia watched him leave, thinking how handsome and charming he was, remembering that despite not being the story's main focus, he ranked second in popularity among readers. Klaus leaned in close, calling her name and asking bluntly if she preferred the crown prince. Panicking, Natalia denied it instantly, though she admitted to herself that Warren had been her favorite character in the novel. When Klaus tugged at her dress and shyly asked about himself, she squealed internally and assured him he was the best. Beaming, Klaus demanded to be her number one from now on, briefly muttering something dark before instantly pretending he hadn't said anything at all. As music filled the hall, Klaus suggested they dance and led her onto the floor. He praised her dancing, but Natalia brushed it off, claiming she was better with a sword and simply athletically challenged. Klaus smiled warmly, calling that just another one of her talents. The words triggered a painful memory of her father scolding her, accusing her of disgracing the family name, and treating her like a failure despite her efforts. Back in the present, she asked quietly if that truly counted as a talent. Klaus affirmed it, holding her hand and telling her it was the most important ability she had earned through hard work. Blushing, Natalia agreed, and Klaus declared that recognizing it was his own talent. Later, when Klaus was briefly called away, Natalia stepped onto a balcony, savoring the cool night wind and thinking how much fun the evening had been. Suddenly, she collided with someone and crashed to the ground. A pained cry rang out, and Natalia froze in shock before realizing she had bumped into a child. Apologizing profusely, she listened as the boy rubbed his head and apologized for startling her. As she looked closer, Natalia noticed his flaming red hair and brown eyes. A sense of alarm flickered through her mind as recognition began to form, leaving her staring at him in stunned disbelief. The boy sprang to his feet, dusting himself off and immediately turning to Natalia with bright, curious eyes. He asked how she had done that, then broke into an energetic grin and praised her, calling her amazing. At once, realization hit her: the red hair, the lively presence, the unmistakable feel. Natalia immediately recognized him as Thomas Rolento, the sole heir of the Rolenta family and the true protagonist of this world. She stared at him in silent awe, internally confirming his identity while feeling an unexpected sense of wonder at standing before someone so important. Thomas, meanwhile, looked at her with open admiration. His cheeks flushed as he excitedly called her amazing, wondering aloud how someone so small could possess such impressive martial skill. Natalia responded awkwardly, momentarily distracted by the strange illusion of a wagging tail behind him, as if he were an overexcited puppy. When Thomas asked if she had learned from a teacher, she explained that she belonged to the Henrik family. The name made Thomas's eyes widen. He repeated it in disbelief, recalling that he had seen the Henrik family mentioned in the Noble Encyclopedia as masters of swordsmanship. He admitted he couldn't remember much about other families yet, but that detail had stuck with him. His bright grin made Natalia blush, and she couldn't help thinking how adorably earnest he looked. Thomas then introduced himself properly as Thomas Rolento and asked for her name. When Natalia replied that she was Natalia Nelt, confusion crossed his face. She calmly clarified that Henrik was her maiden name and that she was already married. The words hit Thomas like a shock. His face turned red as he loudly demanded she repeat herself. When she confirmed it, he stammered in disbelief, saying it was rare for someone so young to be married, even among nobles. Scratching the back of his head, he admitted he had only recently become a noble and still didn't fully understand noble customs. The narration confirmed that Thomas and Klaus were both 7 years old. Natalia's thoughts drifted back to the original novel, where Thomas, once a commoner, was taken in by his noble father after his mother's death. Unfamiliar with noble society, he had endured a harsh upbringing. According to the original timeline, Thomas should have only just begun learning etiquette and social rules, and his father wouldn't have allowed him outside yet. This realization darkened Natalia's mood. Something was clearly wrong. Breaking the silence, Thomas explained that he hadn't been meant to attend the gathering. However, since the new head of the Nelt family would be present, he had been ordered to come as well, being a child of one of the 4 great families. Natalia froze. In the original story, Klaus was supposed to become the family head at 12, after awakening his powers and killing his uncle. But because she had interfered and expelled the uncle early, Klaus had inherited the position far sooner than intended. As images of a shifting timeline flashed through her mind, Natalia realized the story had already begun to change. She had only wanted to save Klaus, never expecting the ripple effects to reach this far. Thomas calling her name snapped her back to reality, and she apologized, claiming she'd been lost in thought. Thomas smiled warmly, saying she was easy to talk to despite being a noble, and admitted he felt uncomfortable inside since he didn't yet look or act like one. Natalia reassured him gently, reminding him that as the heir of one of the 4 great families, his position surpassed that of ordinary nobles. She spun lightly in her dress and told him that confidence mattered more than arrogance, insisting that he was already someone important. Blushing deeply, Thomas listened as she affirmed that he was Thomas Rolento, the one and only heir of this world. Completely flustered, Thomas gathered his courage, extending his hand and shyly asking if she would be his friend. Natalia smiled and began to accept, only for her hand to be suddenly seized. Klaus appeared without warning, gripping her wrist and pulling her back. He glared coldly at Thomas and declared possessively that Natalia was his wife, warning him not to touch her so casually. As Thomas repeated the word, wife, in stunned confusion, Klaus wrapped an arm around Natalia and stated firmly once more that she belonged to him. Thomas stared at Natalia in stunned silence before finally piecing everything together, repeating her name aloud. Realization struck him like lightning as he understood exactly who she was. The wife of the newly appointed head of the Nelt family. Klaus's cold, superior gaze confirmed it without hesitation, making it clear that the one standing before Thomas was indeed the new head himself. Regaining his composure, Thomas quickly introduced himself with a bright smile, clearly pleased to meet someone of equal status among the 4 great families. Watching this, Natalia quietly cheered for her husband. When Thomas extended his hand for a friendly handshake, Klaus immediately slapped it away, his hostility unmistakable. He openly declared that he had no intention of getting along with anyone who dared to touch his wife. Klaus, however, stubbornly doubled down, claiming that even getting close to Natalia was a crime. Natalia deadpanned at the absurdity of his logic, pointing out that by that standard everyone at the party would be criminals. Still, she worried as the tension escalated, fearing that if things continued this way, Thomas and Klaus would become enemies just as they had in the original story. Thomas, observing them closely, briefly wondered if Klaus was controlling her, prompting an immediate and fierce rebuttal from Klaus, who insisted he was protecting her. Sparks flew between the 2 young heads of the great families as they glared at one another. Deciding the interaction was over, Klaus abruptly grabbed Natalia's hand and pulled her away. Thomas called out to her as she was dragged off, promising with an innocent smile that he would write her a letter. Klaus turned back with a terrifying aura and threatened to burn it, causing Natalia to panic. She quickly turned back to Thomas with a bright smile, promising she would wait, before being pulled through the doors. Left alone on the terrace, Thomas watched her leave, his face flushed with lingering emotion. That night, the Nelt estate lay quiet beneath the stars. In their bedroom, Natalia awoke and gazed fondly at Klaus's sleeping face, thinking he looked like an angel. Slipping out of bed, she stood by the window, reflecting on how her actions had begun to alter the story far beyond Klaus and Thomas. Unease crept in as she hoped her interference wouldn't lead to tragedy. A brief vision followed, stars shining over a distant building marked by a cross, then a pink-haired girl praying before the image shifted to her trembling alone in a dark stone room, begging for help. The next morning at the Nelt mansion, Natalia spotted Klaus in the courtyard. Curious, she approached him, only to discover him calmly holding a sealed envelope over a small fire. When she realized it was a letter from Thomas, she screamed and rushed to stop him. Klaus casually dismissed Thomas as a nuisance, but Natalia managed to snatch the letter away just in time. Opening it, she read Thomas's heartfelt words as scenes showed him writing at his desk. He recalled how her encouragement at the party had given him confidence in his identity as the sole heir of the Laurent family. Thanks to her words, he wrote, he was excelling in his studies and training. The letter ended with sincere gratitude and a hopeful request to meet again. Before Natalia could react, Klaus snatched the letter back, crushing it in his fist and declaring that such a meeting would never happen. Internally, Natalia resolved to reply in secret somehow. Klaus then leaned in close, asking with a vulnerable, jealous expression whether she preferred Thomas over him. Blushing, he admitted she was the only one for him. Finding him unbearably cute, Natalia hugged him tightly, reassuring him that he was her one and only. Klaus's jealousy melted instantly into joy. As Natalia held him, she reflected that his jealousy was actually a sign of growth. Proof that Klaus was finally able to express his emotions. Compared to the frightened, traumatized boy he once was, bound by guilt and manipulated by his uncle, this change filled her with relief. Klaus had escaped that dark fate, and for the first time things truly felt better now. Klaus stood in the garden with a bright, confident smile and casually asked Natalia if they should start getting ready. Confused at first, Natalia repeated the word, only for Klaus to explain that they would be touring the city together. She suddenly realized she had momentarily forgotten their plan but quickly composed herself, agreeing that they had to go together. As she watched Klaus, she couldn't help thinking about the weight resting on his shoulders. Despite being a child, he was already forced to shoulder the full responsibilities of the family head, a burden far too heavy for someone his age. Klaus gently patted her head, telling her not to push herself too hard since she was still a child. Klaus then mentioned that after the city tour there was a place he wanted to stop by. Curious, Natalia eagerly asked where, only for him to lean close and whisper the location. Her eyes widened in surprise as the carriage soon arrived in town. As Klaus helped her down, the two began their walk through the streets. Whispers immediately followed them. Some townspeople stared in awe, amazed that someone so young was the new head of the Nelt family, while others voiced concern and doubt, questioning how a child could possibly lead a noble house, especially with the deputy head imprisoned. Natalia glanced at Klaus, certain he could hear every word, yet he maintained a flawless smile. Clenching her fists, she resolved to support him no matter what, reminding herself that he was doing his best. Their walk eventually led them to a large church. A priest greeted them at the entrance, feigning surprise at their visit to such a desolate place. Klaus quickly noticed the oddity of the priest waiting at the door and calmly pointed it out, only for the man to brush it off as coincidence and invite them inside for tea. As they walked down the cracked, dilapidated hallway, Natalia noticed several thin, ragged children standing silently against the walls. Unease settled deep in her chest. Seated inside a room, tea was served in elegant cups that felt completely out of place. Klaus questioned the priest about the children, confirming the building also functioned as an orphanage. When the priest claimed the children were fed 3 meals a day, Klaus pressed further, demanding records and explanations. He revealed that since becoming head he had reviewed all reports, and there were none concerning this orphanage. Recalling the malnourished children, their torn clothes, and the decaying building, Klaus bluntly questioned why the priest himself was so well-dressed. Natalia noticed the expensive teacups and felt growing discomfort as Klaus demanded to know where the orphanage's funds had gone. Suddenly the priest burst into laughter, mocking their naivety. Before they could react, dizziness overtook them, and both collapsed as the teacups spilled. Standing over them, the priest sneered, calling them foolish children for blindly trusting him. Natalia awoke with a gasp on a cold stone floor, realizing they were locked inside an underground prison cell. Klaus lay beside her and apologized for being careless, frustrated that the priest had retaliated so extremely. Determined to escape, Klaus extended his hand toward the lock, dark magic swirling as it clicked open. Amazed by his skill, Natalia followed him into the dark corridor, realizing the prison was far larger than expected. As they moved through the shadows, Natalia suddenly heard a faint gasp from a nearby cell and called out into the darkness, her heart tightening at the sound. Natalia and Klaus stopped in front of another iron-barred cell, peering into the darkness. Natalia called out, demanding to know who was inside. A weak, trembling plea answered her, sending a chill through the corridor. As Natalia stepped closer, her eyes widened when she spotted a small figure collapsed on the floor. When the girl shifted under the dim light, her appearance was revealed. Long pink hair spilling across the stone, bright golden eyes shining through tears. Natalia froze as recognition struck her instantly. Those unmistakable traits could belong to only one person. This was Lillian Felino, the heroine of the story itself. The girl looked up at them helplessly, clasping her hands and begging to be saved. Natalia stood stunned outside the cell, unable to comprehend why the main heroine of the world was locked in a place like this. Forcing herself to focus, she turned to Klaus. Without needing further explanation, he stepped forward and released dark magic toward the lock. With a sharp metallic click, the door opened. Natalia immediately reached inside and called Lillian out. The moment the door opened, Lillian ran forward and clung to her, breaking down in sobs as fear and relief poured out at once. Natalia gently held her, patting her back and murmuring reassurance. As she looked down at the trembling child in her arms, Natalia realized how different reality was from the novel. Lillian had always seemed strong in the story, but right now, she was only 7 years old, small, fragile, and utterly alone in an underground prison. Once Lillian calmed down, she thanked Natalia shyly and formally introduced herself, revealing her noble upbringing. Natalia responded warmly, introducing herself and Klaus, and quickly dismissed formal titles, inviting Lillian to speak comfortably. Overwhelmed by Natalia's kindness, Lillian grabbed her hands in admiration, leaving Natalia momentarily flustered. Gently steering the conversation back, Natalia asked how a noble girl dressed so finely could end up imprisoned like this. Though Natalia already knew the answer from the original story, she pretended ignorance. Lillian hesitated before explaining that she had secretly visited the orphanage, only to be kidnapped afterward. Her family had no idea she had even left home. The pieces immediately fell into place for Natalia. The Felino family possessed a rare healing power coveted by many, which was why they strictly limited its use. However, Lillian had questioned why that power was reserved only for nobles. Acting out of compassion, she had secretly healed commoners, especially children in orphanages, without informing her family. Natalia remembered now the novel had briefly mentioned an incident where Lillian was forbidden from leaving home after being kidnapped. This was that forgotten past, happening far earlier and far more brutally than she had imagined. Lillian had trusted the priest running the orphanage, believing in his kindness, only to be betrayed. Understanding the depth of that betrayal, Natalia realized how deeply this experience must have scarred Lillian's heart. Determined not to let the story repeat itself, Natalia firmly took Lillian's hands and reassured her that her family must be worried. She promised they would escape together. Lillian stared at her in disbelief, emotions overflowing once more. Surrounded by a vision of blooming roses, she nodded through tears, this time not from fear, but from relief and hope. The three children continued through the dim stone corridor, their footsteps echoing softly. Breaking the silence, Lillian hesitantly asked about the dark magic she had seen earlier, realizing that Klaus had used a powerful ability to open the cell door. It was no ordinary magic. Among nobles, the unique powers of the four great families were widely known, and Lillian quickly understood what she had witnessed. Without turning back, Klaus calmly confirmed that it was indeed the Nelt family's power and formally introduced himself as Klaus Nelt, the current head of the family. Lillian froze in shock. She couldn't comprehend why someone of such high status would be trapped in a dungeon. Klaus closed his eyes and answered with quiet dignity, explaining that it was the responsibility of a lord to personally deal with problems occurring within their own territory. Watching from the side, Natalia saw right through him. She recognized that Klaus was deliberately presenting himself in the most composed and impressive way possible, from his posture to his tone. Suddenly, Natalia remembered a crucial detail from the original novel. In that story, Klaus harbored an unrequited love for Lillian, but they were meant to meet only after reaching adulthood. Yet now, their first encounter was happening here, under completely different circumstances. As she watched Klaus standing confidently and Lillian gazing at him with sparkling eyes, Natalia wondered if she was witnessing the moment he fell in love at first sight. Though the setting had changed, she assumed his feelings might remain the same. For a brief moment, Natalia felt excited as a fan of the story, but that excitement quickly turned into pity. In the original plot, Lillian was destined to end up with Thomas, the hero. However, Natalia suddenly realized that future was no longer set in stone. Since she had already changed the timeline and prevented Klaus from becoming the villain, there might now be a route where he could find happiness with Lillian instead. Natalia imagined a future where Klaus and Lillian stood together, wedding bells ringing in her mind. She reminded herself that her own marriage to Klaus was only a contract, arranged by her brother, and meant to be temporary. Clenching her fists, she resolved to support Klaus's happiness no matter what. Yet the realization that she might not be able to stay by his side forever sent a quiet ache through her chest. Even as jealousy flickered in her thoughts, she tried to convince herself that his happiness mattered more. Lost in her emotions, Natalia barely noticed Klaus lightly knocking her on the head to snap her back to reality. Embarrassed, she brushed it off and forced herself to focus. This was no time to drown in unnecessary thoughts. They needed to escape. They soon arrived at a massive chain door sealed with a heavy padlock. Sensing something ominous beyond it, Klaus told Natalia to stand back. Dark magic surged from his hand, and with a violent blast, the lock shattered. The door burst open, and the sight inside made Natalia and Lillian recoil in horror. Blood stained the floor. Inside the large cell, countless children sat huddled together, filthy, bruised, and shaking with fear. The stench of decay filled the air, and Natalia covered her mouth as she took in their condition. Nearby, a bowl of rotten slop sat abandoned, clearly meant to be their food. The reality was unmistakable. Klaus's expression turned ice cold as his suspicions were confirmed. The priest was involved in human trafficking. Lillian stood frozen, her hands trembling as she covered her mouth. She couldn't believe that a man of faith, someone she had trusted, was capable of such cruelty. Tears welled in her eyes as guilt and shock overwhelmed her, realizing that she had visited this church many times without ever noticing the suffering hidden beneath its walls. Lillian trembled as guilt crushed her chest, realizing that if she had noticed the truth sooner, she might have saved the imprisoned children much earlier. Klaus, however, responded with icy calm, stating that the world contained people beyond redemption. He listed con men, thieves, and even priests who acted purely out of selfish greed, adding that some monsters went as far as abusing their own blood relatives. His words carried bitter certainty, shaped by experience. As Klaus stared silently down the corridor, Natalia softly called his name, sensing the darkness weighing on him. Suddenly, slow clapping echoed through the dungeon, shattering the moment. Startled, Natalia turned as the corrupt priest stepped forward, wearing a mocking smile. He sarcastically praised their escape attempt, treating it like a form of entertainment. Natalia snapped in fury, calling him out directly, while Klaus coldly questioned whether the priest's wealth had all come from selling people. The priest laughed without shame, proudly declaring that even filthy orphans could be turned into money and that there was no business more profitable. Natalia growled in disgust, barely containing her rage. The priest then glanced at Lillian and complained that bringing her along was troublesome, casually claiming he had treated her well compared to the others. Behind the bars, the other children trembled uncontrollably, and Natalia immediately sensed something was wrong. She demanded to know what he had done to them. With horrifying indifference, the priest explained that he simply used the children as punching bags. Natalia was stunned as he added that they were replaceable. If they broke or stopped moving, he would just throw them away and get new ones. The realization sickened her as she looked at the battered children on the floor. Understanding the full extent of his cruelty, Lillian stood frozen, barely able to process the truth, before shakily asking if the children she treated had been injured because of him. The priest grinned cruelly, mocking her for finally noticing and calling children naive and easy to fool. He revealed that the children Lillian healed were the ones that couldn't be sold and were only kept to maintain the orphanage's reputation. Worse, he laughed that thanks to her healing, he could beat them over and over again. Lillian broke down, overwhelmed by guilt, unable to form words. Natalia immediately knelt and hugged her. insisting it wasn't her fault and warning that the priest was deliberately trying to break her mentally to make her easier to manipulate. She urged Lillian to stay strong and asked if she would really let scum like him do whatever he wanted. Through tears, Lillian finally shook her head and declared that she had to save the children. Natalia agreed firmly, reminding her that they also needed to save themselves. The priest burst into laughter, mocking their hope. He reached out toward Lillian, stating that a noble girl with healing powers would fetch an unbelievable price in order to come back obediently. Before he could touch her, a sharp bolt of dark magic sliced through the air, forcing him back. Klaus stepped forward protectively, warning him not to touch her with his filthy hands. Realizing Klaus's powers had already awakened, the priest clicked his tongue in disappointment, admitting he had planned to torture them to death later. Natalia froze at his casual admission of murder. The priest's expression hardened as he declared that since they knew too much, he couldn't let them live. Laughing again, he claimed that once they were gone, everyone there would be turned into money. Klaus clenched his teeth in fury, but the priest remained unfazed. Snapping his fingers, he pointed out that even with awakened power, Klaus was still just a child. Armed men emerged from the shadows, surrounding them. Smirking, the priest ordered his men to capture the pink-haired girl alive, stating that a few injuries wouldn't matter. As the thugs charged forward with knives, Natalia's eyes widened as she finally understood the scale of the operation. This was far too big for one man. The priest had many accomplices. One of the thugs suddenly charged forward with a savage roar, swinging his sword down with clear intent to kill. Natalia reacted instantly, pulling Lillian tightly into her arms to shield her from the blow as Klaus shouted her name in alarm. Before the blade could reach them, Klaus unleashed his dark magic, intercepting the attack and shattering the sword mid-swing. The thug froze in shock, unable to comprehend what had just happened. Natalia barely had time to thank Klaus before a much larger, scarred thug lunged forward. His fist slammed into Klaus with brutal force, knocking the air from his lungs and sending him staggering back in pain. Natalia cried out in panic as she saw Klaus struggle to regain his footing. Looming over them, the scarred thug mocked Klaus coldly, vowing to make sure none of them escaped. He laughed arrogantly, claiming that children were far too easy to deal with. Turning his attention to Natalia, he raised his sword and sneered that he would be careful not to damage her pretty face. Instead of flinching, Natalia suddenly leaped high into the air with incredible agility, leaving the thug swinging at empty space. She landed gracefully beside Klaus and boldly declared that he was no longer facing just one opponent. Now he had two. The thug stared in disbelief as he noticed the sword in Natalia's hands and demanded to know when she had armed herself. Natalia casually glanced toward the unconscious guards nearby and replied that she had simply borrowed it from those sleeping on the floor. The thug cursed his fallen teammates but admitted that for a noble, she had impressive spirit. With a twisted grin, he charged again, claiming he would have preferred to meet under different circumstances. Confident Klaus was still affected by the earlier blow. The thug focused solely on Natalia. He assessed the situation smugly, noting that although the children could still use their abilities, they were clearly exhausted and no match for grown men. Dismissing Natalia as nothing more than a young girl, he convinced himself that her earlier success had only come from catching him off guard. In a face-to-face fight, he believed there was no way he could lose. With murderous intent, he swung his blade toward her, cruelly telling her to wait for Klaus in the afterlife. But the sword struck only the ground. Natalia had vanished. The thug spun around in confusion, desperately searching for her. A calm voice spoke from behind him, and before he could react, Natalia appeared at his back with her sword pressed firmly against his neck. She coldly told him that his reaction time was far too slow. In the next instant, she struck. The thug screamed in agony as blood sprayed from his arm. Natalia calmly explained that she had severed the muscle in his arm, ensuring he would never be able to wield a sword again. Despite the pain, the thug began to laugh, mocking her for thinking a single injury meant victory. He barked orders to his remaining men, telling them to ignore Natalia and Klaus and capture the pink-haired girl instead. He sneered that no matter how many times he was knocked down, he still had plenty of subordinates. If Lillian were taken hostage, the two troublesome children would be completely helpless. He warned them not to underestimate adults. At his command, several thugs rushed toward Lillian, who screamed in terror and squeezed her eyes shut as sparks flew from a sudden clash. When the noise faded, Lillian realized she felt no pain at all. Slowly opening her eyes, she saw Natalia and Klaus standing calmly in front of her, surrounded by a pile of unconscious thugs. Klaus adjusted his sleeve coolly, reminding their enemies not to forget he was still there. Natalia looked utterly bored, remarking that the fight hadn't even been enough to count as a warm-up. Groans echoed from the fallen men scattered across the floor. The scarred thug stared at the two children in pure terror, his confidence shattered as a single thought crossed his mind. These weren't ordinary kids, they were monsters. Realizing he stood no chance against the two children, the scarred thug finally raised his hands in surrender. With the immediate danger gone, Natalia and Klaus turned back toward Lillian, who stood behind them trembling, her eyes wide and wet with tears. Their hardened expressions softened instantly as they reached out and asked if she was all right. Lillian grasped their hands tightly, relief flooding her face as she smiled through tears and assured them she was safe. Watching her genuine smile return, Natalia felt deeply satisfied, relieved that the light of the original heroine hadn't been crushed. But that sense of relief didn't last long. As Natalia scanned the dungeon, she realized something was wrong. The priest was nowhere to be seen. She quickly understood that he must have slipped away during the chaos. With a sharp resolve, Natalia declared she would chase him down, refusing to let him escape justice. Elsewhere, the priest ran desperately through the dark stone corridors of the orphanage, gasping for breath as panic consumed him. His mind spiraled in confusion and fury as he struggled to understand how his perfectly profitable operation had collapsed so suddenly. Until recently, everything had gone smoothly. Bribes had silenced problems, the Nelt family head was meant to be powerless, and the children were easy prey. Yet in such a short span of time, the acting head was imprisoned, Claus had awakened his powers, and everything unraveled. The priest placed the blame squarely on Natalia, convinced that ever since she married into the Nelt family, his downfall had begun. Accepting that his situation was dire, he abandoned any plans of making more money, and decided to flee with what wealth he already had, confident it would allow him to disappear for a while. Reaching a heavy door at the end of a staircase, he believed freedom was just beyond it, but as the door creaked open, his hopes were crushed. Natalia and Klaus stood directly in his path, calmly blocking his escape. Natalia coldly remarked that he was late, and the priest froze in disbelief, unable to understand how they had gotten there first. Natalia explained that they had used Klaus's shadow magic to search the building and locate a shortcut. Before the priest could react further, Klaus unleashed a sharp bolt of dark magic, striking him down and sending him crashing to the floor. Terrified, the priest groveled and begged for mercy, desperately offering a heavy bag of gold in exchange for his life. Klaus looked down at him with pure disgust, asking if he truly believed money earned through the suffering of children had any value. His dark magic flared as he reminded the priest of the pain he had inflicted and suggested he was about to taste his own cruelty. Screaming in terror, the priest pleaded for his life until his cries finally faded. Standing over the unconscious man, Klaus stated firmly that he would not kill him, but would hand him over to the military police and let the judiciary deliver judgment. With the villain subdued, Klaus returned to the cells and shattered the heavy locks, freeing the imprisoned children. They stepped out hesitantly, frightened and unsure, until Natalia knelt down and gently reassured them that the danger was over and the bad people were gone. Looking at their battered faces, she promised they would be taken care of from now on. When a small girl timidly asked if that meant she wouldn't feel pain anymore, Natalia smiled with determination and vowed that she and Klaus would protect them from anyone who tried to hurt them again. The children burst into cheers and tears of joy, finally feeling safe. Lillian watched quietly, her heart full as she saw peace return to them. As the moment settled, Natalia noticed Klaus looked slightly strained. He admitted that controlling his shadow over such a distance had drained his mental energy, though he assured her he could still move. Natalia agreed, reminding him that while help was on the way, there was still one last task left to finish. Above them, the orphanage stood silent beneath a vast, star-filled night sky, marking the end of one nightmare and the beginning of justice. The orphanage filled with joyful cheers as the imprisoned children realized they were finally free. Their laughter echoed through the halls, a sound of pure relief after years of suffering. Natalia watched them quietly, but her expression soon hardened. Turning toward Klaus and Lillian, she reminded them that despite the victory, their responsibilities were not yet over. That night, beneath a clear, star-filled sky, the scene shifted to the grand estate of House Felino. Guards at the gate nearly stumbled in shock when Lillian suddenly appeared before them. Recognizing her at once, they anxiously asked where she had been all this time. Lillian bowed deeply, apologizing for the worry she had caused. Though she promised to properly apologize to everyone later, she insisted on immediately meeting her father. Gesturing toward Natalia and Klaus, she explained that these two were the ones who had saved her life and must be brought inside at once. They were escorted into an ornate study where Enrique Felino, the stern head of House Felino and Lillian's father, sat behind a heavy desk. With sharp eyes and a cold demeanor, he instructed them to sit and immediately questioned Lillian for acting recklessly on her own. He reminded her that he had warned her countless times about the danger of their family's healing powers and accused her of violating the most important rule, never to use them carelessly. Leaning forward, Enrique demanded to know if she understood how much danger she had brought upon their household. Lillian lowered her gaze and quietly confirmed that she did. He explained that healing abilities were highly coveted and therefore had to remain hidden at all costs. Without waiting for further response, he forbade her from leaving the estate again without his explicit permission. Lillian accepted the order obediently, her eyes filled with sadness. At that moment, Natalia could no longer remain silent. She firmly took Lillian's hand and offered her a warm, reassuring smile before standing and introducing herself with proper noble etiquette as Klaus's wife. Natalia knelt. She then introduced Klaus as the current head of House Knelt. Enrique's expression shifted slightly as he recognized them. Recalling their previous meeting at a royal banquet, he formally thanked them for rescuing his daughter, but Natalia wasn't satisfied. Fixing him with a piercing gaze, she asked whether that was all he intended to say. Confused, Enrique questioned what else he was supposed to ask. Natalia pressed him, demanding to know why he hadn't asked what Lillian had actually gone through. Enrique dismissed the details, stating that it was obvious Lillian had been kidnapped after her powers were discovered during relief efforts. Natalia's frustration boiled over. If he understood that much, she demanded, then why was he acting this way? Why hadn't he asked whether his daughter was injured, frightened, or emotionally scarred? Her voice trembled as she questioned why he hadn't said a single comforting word, why he hadn't told Lillian that he had been worried. Or held her to ease her fear. Tears shimmered in Natalia's eyes as she delivered her final, devastating question. Why couldn't he simply tell his own daughter that he loved her? The room fell into heavy silence. Enrique sat frozen, unable to respond as the weight of Natalia's words hung painfully in the air, exposing everything he had failed to say. In the original story, he was depicted as a cold, severe father, unyielding, distant, and harsh toward Lillian. Yet Natalia, having read the novel in its entirety, knew the truth hidden beneath that facade. Enrique's severity was never born of cruelty. He loved his daughter deeply, even if he had never known how to express it. A vision of the original timeline surfaced in Natalia's mind, revealing the tragedy that once defined Lillian's fate. Amid collapsed rubble and blood-stained ruins, a younger Lillian knelt beside her father's dying body, sobbing uncontrollably. Confused and heartbroken, she begged to know why he had shielded her with his own life when she believed he hated her. Desperate, she poured every ounce of her healing magic into his wounds, but it was already too late. Enrique, barely clinging to life, gently told her to stop. There was no point, he said, and he didn't want her to waste her power on him. Through her tears, Lillian apologized, lamenting that she wasn't strong enough and wishing she had more power to save him. That was when Enrique, at the brink of death, finally spoke the words she had longed to hear. He told her not to cry and confessed that she was wrong to believe he didn't love her. That final truth came only after it was far too late, leaving Lillian with a lifetime of regret and unanswered longing. Back in the present, Lillian stood frozen as Enrique finally began to explain himself. He revealed that the reason he had always been so strict was precisely because of her gentle heart. Whenever she saw someone suffering, she instinctively used her healing power without any concern for herself, just as she had done recently. It frightened him more than anything. Enrique then unveiled the hidden danger behind their family's gift. Their healing power was not limitless. Pushing beyond one's natural capacity came at a terrible cost. It would drain the body, damage the spirit, and ultimately shorten one's lifespan. Every reckless act of kindness could bring Lillian closer to her own death. Being strict, he admitted, was the only way he knew how to protect her. He believed that if he acted harshly enough, she might hesitate, think twice, and survive. For the first time, genuine regret softened Enrique's expression. He apologized to Lillian, his voice heavy with emotion. Overwhelmed, Lillian broke down in tears. Awkwardly, yet tenderly, Enrique told her not to cry so much, admitting that he had always been weak to her tears. Then he pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly as he confessed his relief and gratitude that she had returned home alive. Watching the long overdue reconciliation unfold, Natalia and Klaus quietly smiled, sensing that this was a moment meant only for father and daughter. Natalia suggested they step away and give them privacy. She felt certain that Lillian would be all right now, no longer burdened by misunderstanding or silent fear. As they walked away together, Natalia glanced at Klaus and made a quiet vow in her heart. Just as Lillian now had her father's love made clear, Klaus would never face hardship alone either. Whatever trials awaited them, she promised to stand beside him, always, ready to face the future together. Natalia stood firmly on the training grounds of the Nelt estate, personally overseeing the knights with an iron grip. Her sharp voice echoed across the field as she barked commands, correcting stances and demanding absolute focus. The knights struggled to keep up, sweat and tears streaming down their faces as they endured her relentless drills. From a distance, Klaus watched quietly, witnessing just how merciless her training truly was. Natalia reflected on the state of the knights she had inherited. They had been recruited by Klaus's uncle, and in her eyes, they were completely incompetent. Unwilling to tolerate weakness, she had dismissed them all and rebuilt the force from scratch. As a member of the Henrik family, renowned for their mastery of the sword, she believed there was no one more qualified than herself to train them. She meticulously corrected every movement, emphasizing balance, posture, and precision, pushing their bodies to the brink. Though the knights admitted their skills had improved dramatically under her instruction, her methods felt brutal. Exhausted and desperate, they cast pleading glances toward Klaus, silently begging him to intervene and put an end to their suffering. Eventually, Klaus stepped forward and gently suggested that Natalia might want to ease up on them. She turned to him with an innocent, radiant smile and casually replied that she had only been giving light instruction, so far. Her cheerful declaration that she planned to become far stricter once things truly took shape crushed the knights' spirits entirely, leaving them sobbing in despair. Sensing the moment, Klaus changed the subject, his cheeks faintly flushed. He asked Natalia if there was something she wanted to do, then shyly suggested that they go on a honeymoon together. The sudden proposal caught Natalia off guard. Soon, a carriage rolled beneath a bright blue sky. Natalia leaned out the window, admiring the scenery as the wind brushed past her. She asked why they were suddenly going on a trip, and Klaus explained that after everything they had endured, things had finally settled down. Now that his responsibilities were momentarily under control, he wanted to spend time alone with her. He reminded her that they were technically newlyweds and confessed that he had been planning this trip for a long time. Natalia was struck by the contrast in him. Recently, Klaus had been acting calm, composed, and authoritative as the head of the Nelt family, a side she found admirable. But now, seeing him blush and fidget so cutely made her heart burst with affection. She realized he must have worked tirelessly to finish all his paperwork just to make this honeymoon possible, and the thought overwhelmed her with warmth. They eventually arrived at their destination, a breathtaking private beach owned by the Nelt family. Natalia was stunned by the crystal clear water and the sheer scale of the estate's wealth, finally understanding why Klaus's uncle had been so obsessed with the inheritance. Klaus mentioned that there was also a forest behind the beach where they could go camping, which only added to the excitement. Encouraging her to enjoy herself, Klaus smiled warmly and Natalia happily agreed. The couple spent the day immersed in peaceful joy. Natalia changed into a beautiful resort-exclusive dress, and together they watched dolphins leap gracefully from the waves. They went swimming, with Klaus clinging to a float while praising Natalia's skill, only for her to tease him about his feet not touching the ground. As the day came to an end, they relaxed together with tropical drinks in hand, savoring the calm, intimate happiness they had earned at last. Natalia and Klaus lay side by side on the large bed, finally wrapped in a rare moment of peace. Natalia released a long, contented sigh, admitting it had been a long time since she felt this relaxed, and Klaus quietly agreed. As they rested together, memories from their turbulent journey surfaced one after another. Their wedding day, the fierce confrontation with Klaus's uncle, Natalia severing ties with her parents, the kidnapping incident, and even their encounter with Lillian. So much had happened in such a short span of time that it felt almost unreal. Breaking the silence, Klaus turned toward Natalia and gently took her hand. Startled, she looked at him as he softly called her name and thanked her. He admitted that he had never truly expressed his gratitude before, but he wanted to say it properly at least once. Klaus confessed that marrying Natalia had changed his life instantly. Without her, he believed he would have ended up becoming a twisted, broken man. Natalia's eyes shimmered as she listened. Klaus continued, telling her that she had completely changed his world and given him a bright future. He thanked her again, his words sincere and heartfelt. Overcome with emotion, Natalia blushed and replied that he had saved her as well. She recalled how she had once been trapped by her parents' cruel words and expectations, and how Klaus, through his own effort and talent, had reached out and pulled her free. Choking up, she admitted that she had been saved by him too, then wrapped her arms around him and thanked him from the bottom of her heart. Klaus flushed deeply, his eyes widening in surprise before he quietly returned her embrace, holding her tightly. Later that night, under a sky filled with stars, Natalia stirred awake and realized she had fallen asleep. Turning her head, she watched Klaus sleeping peacefully beside her, his expression calm and untroubled. She reflected on his past, imagining how even his sleep must have been restless when he lived under his uncle's control. It made sense why the original Klaus in the novel had become a twisted man, but Natalia felt certain that future no longer existed. Klaus had regained himself, and the path ahead had already changed. As she studied his sleeping face, she couldn't help but smile, finding him adorable. Still, half jokingly and half serious, she resolved to make sure the knights trained even harder, just in case she ever needed to stop Klaus herself. With that thought, she quietly wished for his future to be filled with nothing but happiness. Noticing the window was open, Natalia wondered if she had fallen asleep like that. She moved to close it, but the moment she glanced at the glass, her blood ran cold. Reflected in the window was a horrifying dark silhouette with a single glowing eye. A piercing scream tore from her throat, shattering the peaceful night. The next morning, Natalia explained everything to Klaus, a male aide, and her maid Mary. She insisted that she had initially suspected an intruder and immediately checked outside, but there were no footprints, no signs of movement, nothing at all. Trembling, she concluded that it had to be a ghost. Clinging desperately to Mary, Natalia begged her to believe the story, reminding her that she had been the only servant Natalia kept after dismissing everyone else. Mary, slightly overwhelmed by the emotional appeal, eventually tried to comfort her. With a straight face, she suggested that perhaps even ghosts could become jealous of how close Natalia and Klaus were, and that the spirit must have left after seeing them together. Natalia was left stunned, completely unsure how to react to such an explanation. Natalia stood frozen, still trying to process Mary's explanation, genuinely wondering if she was being gently pacified rather than reassured. The shock drained her completely, leaving her slumped and defeated. At that moment, Klaus stepped closer, placing a steady hand on her shoulder and meeting her gaze with unwavering seriousness. In a calm, sincere voice, he told her that he believed her. The words hit Natalia hard. Relief flooded her chest, tears welling up instantly as she realized Klaus truly stood on her side. Overcome with emotion, she rushed forward and wrapped her arms tightly around him, clinging as she cried that she wanted to weep. Nearby, the male aide quietly muttered to Mary that Lord Klaus surely didn't believe in ghosts, but Mary quickly shushed him, pointing out Klaus's unusually serious expression as he held Natalia close. Sensing the mood needed a change, Mary clapped her hands and reminded them that they were on vacation and shouldn't waste such precious time worrying. She mentioned that the waves were too high for swimming today and suggested having a picnic instead, noting a vast field nearby. The moment Natalia heard the word picnic, Her spirits lifted instantly. She cheered excitedly, imagining how wonderful it would be to eat outdoors. Mary smiled and offered to prepare tomato sandwiches for her. Natalia was deeply touched, realizing Mary remembered her favorite food, and thanked her warmly while looking forward to the meal. Meanwhile, the aide jokingly teased Klaus, saying Natalia had stolen him away. Klaus responded without hesitation by sharply kicking the man's leg, making him yelp in pain. Soon they arrived at a breathtaking green field, stretching endlessly under the bright sky. Natalia marveled at the scenery, enjoying the pleasant wind, and Klaus quietly agreed. As Mary and Natalia began setting things up, Klaus and the aide carried over a large rolled mat. The aide seized the moment to offer unsolicited romantic advice, suggesting Klaus say something sweet about Natalia's smile. Klaus shot him an annoyed glare and told him to shut up, silently thinking that if Natalia weren't fond of the man, he would have fired him long ago. Once everything was prepared, they sat together under the sun and began eating their sandwiches. Midway through the meal, Klaus suddenly leaned toward Natalia and told her to stay still. Startled, her heart raced as he reached out, gently wiping something from her cheek. Natalia blushed furiously, thanking him and realizing, with mild shock, that even at his age, Klaus could make a woman's heart flutter so easily. As she watched him eat, Natalia reflected on how different he was from the original story. The Klaus she knew now was nothing like the villain described in the novel. He was kind, gentle, and incredibly handsome. She imagined a future where people would fight over him and felt an odd sense of pride, like a doting parent admiring her child. After eating, they sat back on the grass, soaking in the peaceful atmosphere. Natalia sighed contentedly, enjoying the calm, at least at first. As the silence dragged on, boredom slowly crept in. She glanced at Klaus, who seemed perfectly content doing absolutely nothing, and began wondering if picnics were always this quiet. The blue sky was beautiful, but sitting still for so long started to feel unbearable. Unable to endure the boredom any longer, Natalia suddenly jumped up, startling Klaus. She declared that she couldn't take it anymore and excitedly suggested they play hide and seek, pointing toward the nearby forest. Laughing, she announced she would go hide and that Klaus should come find her. Klaus tried to stop her, calling out her name and attempting to warn her about the forest, but it was too late. Natalia had already dashed off between the trees. Moments later, reality caught up with her. Standing alone among towering trees, Natalia realized she was completely lost. Sweating nervously, she admitted she hadn't realized just how vast the forest was. Remembering Klaus's unfinished warning, she realized he had likely been trying to prevent exactly this situation. Exhausted, Natalia sat down at the base of a large tree, catching her breath and telling herself that Klaus would eventually find her. Just as she tried to calm down, a strong gust of wind swept through the forest. The atmosphere shifted as the trees began swaying violently, instantly reminding her of the eerie ghost she had seen earlier. Anxiety tightened her chest, and tears welled in her eyes as she desperately searched for a brighter area, hoping to escape the oppressive atmosphere. Just as fear threatened to overwhelm her, a sudden rustling sound burst from the bushes. Natalia screamed in pure terror, convinced that the ghost had finally found her. Instead, she was met with a bizarre sight. A young boy with light green hair hanging upside down, completely tangled in thick, twisting vines. Despite his helpless position, he looked strangely calm, almost unbothered by the situation. Natalia stared at him in disbelief, unable to understand how someone trapped so thoroughly could remain so relaxed. The boy casually spoke to her, asking for help as if this were an everyday inconvenience. He explained that he had used his power but could no longer control it, bluntly telling her to do something. His words made Natalia freeze. The mention of power immediately triggered alarm bells in her mind. Only the 4 great houses possessed special abilities, and she quickly ran through them in her thoughts. The Nelt family wielded darkness, the Fileno family had healing powers, the Rolento family controlled gravity, and only one family commanded plants, the Orobate family. As she studied the boy more closely, realization struck her. This had to be Tim Orobat, a character from the original novel, and someone around her own age. Her memory filled in the details instantly. In the story, Tim was the hero's best friend, a carefree and easygoing boy who fought alongside Thomas against Klaus. His laid-back personality made his fierce loyalty during critical moments even more impactful. Back in the present, Tim groaned as the vines tightened around him, then suddenly warned Natalia that she was surrounded. Thick, wriggling vines began crawling toward her from every direction, brushing against her legs and arms. Natalia shrieked in disgust as she tried to evade them, horrified by their slimy movement and the way they seemed to have a will of their own. She began dodging swiftly, her body moving on instinct with impressive speed. Tim watched her struggle with mild fascination, even complimenting her agility while wishing her good luck, in a tone that suggested he was merely a spectator. Natalia snapped back at him in frustration, incredulous that he could remain so calm while being half strangled by his own power. Watching him more closely, she realized this composure was exactly like the Tim she remembered from the novel, unshakably relaxed even in dangerous situations. Acting quickly, Natalia reached down and pulled a dagger from a holster strapped to her leg. With precise, practiced movements, she sliced through the attacking vines one by one. Tim let out a small sound of admiration as the vines recoiled. When another vine lunged toward his leg, Natalia sprang into the air, cutting it down mid-attack. She caught Tim in her arms and landed smoothly, holding him in a princess carry. She asked if he was alright, and he answered simply, unfazed by the ordeal, still holding him. Natalia looked at the mass of writhing vines and demanded to know how something like this had even happened. Tim casually explained that he had been experimenting, trying to create a combat plant. Giving it commands was too troublesome, so he had programmed it to move on its own. An explanation so reckless and simple that it left Natalia stunned. Tim casually admitted that he had intentionally made the plant more aggressive, and Natalia immediately understood why it had attacked even its own creator. She couldn't help thinking that his excuse, that giving commands one by one was too much trouble, was so perfectly like him. Tim offhandedly mentioned that he had also given it a regeneration function. Natalia froze in disbelief and demanded to know why he would create something so reckless. Tim began to explain, only to abruptly give up midway, saying it would be a long story and too much of a hassle to tell. Natalia grew more frustrated by the second. The way he started talking and then refused to finish only made her more curious, yet he simply brushed it off with lazy indifference. Before she could press him further, Klaus suddenly burst through the trees, urgently calling her name. He warned that it was easy to get lost in the forest and looked visibly relieved to see her unharmed. Natalia apologized for running off on her own, and Klaus admitted he should have warned her earlier, but his expression darkened the moment he noticed Tim in her arms. His sharp gaze fixed on the unfamiliar boy as he demanded to know who he was, and why Natalia was carrying him. Caught off guard, Natalia felt an irrational wave of guilt, as if she had been caught doing something wrong, even though there was nothing inappropriate about the situation. Tim introduced himself as Tim Orabate. The surname immediately put Klaus on edge. He questioned what someone from the prestigious Orabate family was doing in a place like this. Tim casually pointed to the wreckage of his automated combat plant. Klaus was stunned by the very concept, while Natalia, already having experienced its attack, was less surprised. Tim explained that the plant was designed to be intelligent and aggressive, capable of acting on its own and regenerating even when cut down. When Klaus asked why anyone would create something so dangerous, Tim replied without hesitation that it made life easier. If it could handle tasks independently, he wouldn't have to waste time issuing commands. Natalia had already grown accustomed to his blunt laziness, but Klaus remained deeply wary. Tim eventually admitted he had overdone it. He poured too much power into the plant, causing it to go berserk and spiral out of control. After thanking Natalia for saving him, Tim asked for her name. Realizing she had never properly introduced herself, Natalia stepped back, performed a polite curtsy, and introduced herself as Natalia Knelt. Before the moment could settle, Klaus stepped forward and firmly declared that she was his wife. Tim stared at them blankly and commented that being married at such a young age sounded rough. His blunt honesty left Natalia smiling awkwardly. He had effortlessly voiced the kind of thought most people would keep to themselves. She couldn't help thinking he was far too straightforward for his own good. Their conversation was suddenly interrupted by a rustling sound in the bushes. Natalia shrieked, bracing herself for another attack. Instead, a small, round green creature with oversized leaves sprouting from its head popped out, letting out a soft "moo." As it hopped toward them, the tension instantly melted. Natalia found it unbelievably adorable. The creature hurried straight to Tim, who calmly scooped it up and introduced it as Moo, his partner. Seeing it up close, Natalia's eyes widened in realization. She recognized the tiny being immediately. It was none other than the official mascot of the world of Edingle. Natalia stared at the small green creature in awe, completely enchanted. Moo was even more adorable than how it had been described in the novel. In the story, it had always served as a soothing presence amid all the heavy drama, often shown dozing off while waiting for Tim or randomly clinging to leaves for no reason at all. But seeing it in real life was on another level. Her heart raced as she watched it wiggle and chirp softly. It was unbelievably cute. Tim noticed the way her eyes sparkled and casually asked if she wanted to hold it. Natalia's excitement burst out instantly. She eagerly asked if that was really okay. Without hesitation, Tim handed Moo over. The moment it settled into her arms, she gasped. It was incredibly light, soft, and faintly fluffy, and it even carried a refreshing scent like fresh greenery. As she gently nuzzled it, completely captivated, she felt like it was even cuter than anything the novel had conveyed. Moo let out happy little sounds while she admired it, and Natalia practically melted. However, not everyone was pleased. Klaus had been silently watching the entire exchange with narrowed, darkened eyes. Finally, he tugged on Natalia's sleeve to pull her attention away. With a faint blush and an uncharacteristically insecure tone, he asked if she thought the creature was cuter than him. The sudden jealousy caught Natalia off guard, but instead of being upset, she found it overwhelmingly adorable. Without missing a beat, she pulled Klaus into a tight hug and reassured him that he was, of course, her number one. As she doted on her husband, Klaus shot a sharp, icy glare toward Mew. The tiny creature squeaked loudly in protest, clearly sensing the hostility. Tim observed the entire scene with his usual blank expression and asked who Klaus was. Natalia quickly realized she hadn't formally introduced them and explained that he was Klaus Knelt. Klaus immediately wrapped an arm around her and firmly declared that he was her husband. Tim commented that he had heard about their marriage, but the possessive aura radiating from Klaus was unmistakable and slightly terrifying. Internally, Tim noted that Natalia didn't seem to recognize how intense Klaus's possessiveness truly was. She probably saw him as nothing more than a loyal little dog. Tim briefly considered warning her, perhaps as thanks for saving him earlier, but after a moment of thought, he dismissed the idea. It sounded like too much trouble. Natalia, noticing he had started to say something and stopped again, grew frustrated and demanded he finish what he was going to say, but he simply brushed it off. Their tense atmosphere was abruptly broken by a loud growl. Natalia's stomach rumbled embarrassingly. She flushed bright red, confused about why she was hungry again despite having eaten a sandwich before entering the forest. Maybe it was because she was still physically a child. Klaus immediately shifted his attention, gently asking what she wanted to eat. The group returned to the villa and shared a meal together. After finishing, Natalia politely thanked everyone, but her attention soon shifted to Tim. She watched in stunned disbelief as he devoured an enormous mountain of food. Plate after plate disappeared into his small frame, and she couldn't comprehend where it was all going. Once the meal ended, Klaus's tone turned serious. He questioned Tim about why he had entered the Nelt family's private forest in the first place. The villa and its surrounding land, including the forest, belonged entirely to the Nelt family, and technically outsiders were not permitted there. Natalia realized he was absolutely right. Tim explained that he had missed the recent imperial party, the one where Natalia and Klaus had met Thomas Rolento and Warren Ettingle. Since he hadn't been able to greet them properly there, he heard they were staying nearby and decided to visit in person. He had even brought a gift. Natalia blinked in confusion and asked what gift he meant. Tim calmly revealed that the gift was the very plant she had just sliced apart in the forest. Natalia was horrified. That disgusting, aggressive plant was supposed to be a present. Tim explained that he thought it might be useful, which was why he created it, but admitted he had gotten carried away while designing it and accidentally made it too powerful and aggressive. Natalia reluctantly admitted that if it hadn't gone berserk, it might actually have been somewhat useful, though the choice of gift itself was undeniably strange. Then Tim casually dropped another bombshell. He mentioned that he had originally planned to secretly leave the gift in the forest the day before. Klaus immediately turned to Natalia with a pointed look. Yesterday, hadn't she claimed she saw a ghost? Natalia recalled the previous night in horror, the dark silhouette outside her window, and the single glowing eye that made her scream, convinced she had seen a ghost. Back in the present, she insisted it had been real, describing the moving shadow she saw. Tim, unfazed, casually stated that the ghost was just him. The revelation left both Natalia and Klaus staring at him in shock. After a brief silence, Natalia burst into a disbelieving scream, while Tim stood there calmly with Mew, as if nothing about the situation was strange at all. The story shifted back to the previous night. Under a crescent moon, Tim had been finishing his botanical creation, calmly manipulating a potted plant with his powers while Mew watched proudly. Since he had missed the imperial party, he had been thinking of a way to properly greet the Nelt family. A gift seemed appropriate, and he was certain they would appreciate something of his own making. After carefully tying a large pink ribbon onto one of the branches, he decided it was ready. Without hesitation, he set off for the villa that very night. Mew helped carry the heavy pot, straining adorably as they traveled beneath the stars toward the Nelt estate. Once they arrived, Mew fluttered toward the upper floors while Tim stepped onto the balcony with the plant. However, as he looked at it, he felt it lacked impact. Deciding it needed something extra, he chose to infuse it with more power to make it stronger. The moment he channeled his energy, the plant began to snap and crack violently. Branches twisted and expanded far beyond his expectations, rattling and mutating in a way that even startled him. At that exact time inside the villa, Natalia had been walking down the hallway, wondering if she had forgotten something before bed. Drawn by a strange presence, she glanced toward the window, only to see a dark silhouette framed by the moonlight, writhing branches twisting around it. The sight was so terrifying that she let out a blood-curdling scream. Outside, Tim realized she had noticed him, but before he could react, the overpowered plant suddenly turned aggressive. The very gift he intended to present began coiling around him instead. Mew cried out in alarm as the mutated branches wrapped tightly around Tim and the chaos unfolded under the night sky. Back in the present, Tim finished recounting the incident as if it were nothing remarkable. Natalia sat speechless, overwhelmed by the absurd chain of events. There were too many things she wanted to say, yet no words came out properly. When she finally managed to ask why he would deliver a gift in the middle of the night, Tim answered bluntly, it was simply because that was when he finished making it. Since it was done, he saw no reason to wait. He added a casual apology for frightening her. Natalia awkwardly insisted it was fine, though she admitted she had been badly startled. Klaus commented that Natalia had always been terrible with ghosts, which embarrassed her deeply, especially considering she had lived 2 lifetimes. Still, she couldn't deny it. A childhood trauma from watching a horror movie about a ghost in a well had cemented her lifelong fear. Tim observed her reaction with a faint, rare smile and remarked that her fear of ghosts was actually cute. Natalia froze, her face instantly turning bright red. She was completely unprepared to be called cute so directly and began stammering in flustered disbelief. Suddenly, Klaus slammed his hands onto the table, his expression dark with jealousy. He warned Tim not to hit on his wife. Tim calmly replied that he was merely stating his honest thoughts, but Klaus firmly told him to stop. Unbothered, Tim declared that he would say whatever he wanted whenever he felt like it. Klaus then turned to Natalia, grabbing her shoulders and calling her name with intensity. Flushing slightly himself, he passionately declared that she was always cute, whether she was being sweet, skillful with a sword, or even scared of ghosts. Every part of her was cute, especially that side of her. He pulled her close and told her not to look away. Natalia's mind went blank from the overwhelming affection. Embarrassment and happiness mixed together until she felt like her soul was floating. Between Tim's blunt compliment and Klaus's possessive declaration, she was left utterly flustered, completely swept up in the storm of unexpected cuteness. Natalia happily melted into Klaus's arms, hugging him tightly and declaring in her heart that he truly was the best. Surrounded by his affection, she basked in the sweetness of the moment, completely charmed by how openly he adored her. From the side, Tim watched the couple with mild interest. He found their dynamic intriguing, quietly noting that Klaus was the type of man who didn't show his true feelings on his face. Yet his emotions were obvious if you paid attention. As the atmosphere settled, Natalia suddenly wondered how long Tim had been wandering around alone. When she asked, Tim bluntly replied that he was bored and preferred relaxing by himself. As for his parents, he casually described them as neglectful. The word alone made Natalia freeze. To her, that was a serious problem. No matter how capable he seemed, Tim was still just a child. She couldn't accept the idea of him roaming around alone without proper care. Looking at his sleepy expression, she decided there was no way she could leave such a wimpy kid unattended. After thinking it over, Natalia suddenly had an idea. Brightly, she suggested that Tim simply stay with them at the villa. The place was enormous, and one more person wouldn't make a difference. Besides, it was dangerous for a child to be alone. Tim raised a brow, asking if that was really appropriate since they were on their honeymoon. Natalia laughed it off, insisting they were all just kids anyway. So it was no different from a normal trip. Internally, Klaus was devastated. What was supposed to be private time for just the two of them had now gained an unexpected guest. Still, when Natalia turned to him and asked if it was okay, he forced a strained smile and agreed. Tim thanked them casually, even teasing the word honeymoon, which only deepened Klaus's silent despair. Soon, the trio began enjoying their summer together. Tim wandered around in a wide straw hat, trying to catch butterflies with a net while Natalia and Klaus watched. At the beach, they played games, Klaus, blindfolded, wobbling as he tried to smash a watermelon while the others cheered. Despite everything, the days were lively and fun. Later, Natalia ran off toward the water, leaving Klaus and Tim sitting side by side with drinks in hand. The peaceful silence didn't last long. Out of nowhere, Tim asked if Klaus loved Natalia no matter what she did. The sudden question shocked Klaus so badly that he sprayed his drink everywhere. Tim continued calmly, pointing out that although Klaus wasn't exactly hiding his feelings, Natalia clearly didn't notice them. Then he delivered the decisive blow. Natalia only saw Klaus as a child. The words hit hard. Klaus collapsed face first into the sand, utterly defeated. After a moment, he glared at Tim and asked if he was trying to start a fight. Tim denied it, saying he simply believed Klaus had a long road ahead of him. Klaus sighed. He knew that already. But there was plenty of time. Tim tilted his head and bluntly asked if Klaus wanted to flirt with her. The word made Klaus turn bright red. He loudly denied it at first, calling it abnormal. But under Tim's steady gaze, he looked away and quietly admitted that he would like to. Tim extended a hand and proposed a plan. Klaus hesitated, suspicious, but Tim insisted it would be fun. After some grumbling, Klaus finally agreed. That night, the scene shifted to a dark forest. Natalia, trembling, walked forward holding a torch, her eyes watering as she wondered how she ended up in this terrifying situation. Earlier on the beach, Tim had suggested a test of courage. Natalia immediately protested, admitting she was terrible with scary things. Tim argued that it would make great memories. Nervously, she tried to excuse herself, saying the boys could go without her. But Tim explained the rules. He had made a small Moo doll and hidden it somewhere in the forest. The goal was simple: find it and bring it back. Natalia whined that she didn't want to participate, but curiosity got the better of her. When she asked what a Moo doll even was, Tim held up a small green stuffed toy with button eyes. An unmistakable miniature version of Moo, and somehow, despite her fear, she ended up in the forest anyway. Tim sweetened the deal. If Natalia completed the test of courage, she wouldn't just get praise, she'd receive a specially crafted Moo doll. Instantly interested, she leaned in as Tim demonstrated its special function. When he pressed its belly, the doll let out a soft mood. Natalia's eyes sparkled. A doll that made sounds. That was already irresistible. But Tim wasn't finished. If she could find the hidden doll within an hour, he would let her pet the real Moo as much as she wanted for an entire day. That sealed it. Natalia was fired up, already imagining sewing tiny outfits for the doll and cuddling fluffy Moo nonstop. The challenge would take place that very night. For safety, Tim suggested she go with Klaus since the forest would be dark. Natalia readily agreed. As night fell, the once cheerful villa grounds transformed into something eerie. Clutching a torch, Natalia stepped into the forest, gripping Klaus's arm tightly. Every rustle made her shriek. She admitted openly that she was terrified. Klaus reassured her gently, reminding her he was right beside her. She clung to him even more, pale and trembling. Watching her, Klaus felt conflicted. Natalia was usually more mature than him despite their ages, so seeing her this vulnerable was rare and undeniably cute. He felt a twinge of guilt for going along with Tim's plan, silently cursing that fluffy little prick. Still, he couldn't deny how much he enjoyed the fact that she relied on him so completely. To Natalia, the forest seemed alive with threats. Twisted tree branches looked like grasping spirits. A snake on a branch nearly made her jump out of her skin. She muttered about tree ghosts, questioning why forests became so horrifying at night. They searched near tree roots and bushes, guessing where Tim might have hidden the doll, but found nothing. Frustration mounted as fear chipped away at her nerves. She was close to her limit, while Klaus scanned the area, trying to think logically about where else it could be. Eventually, they found a dark cave entrance yawning between the trees. Klaus raised the torch and declared it suspicious. Natalia stared at the black opening, her face draining of color. Sensing her fear, Klaus offered to go in alone if she preferred. That suggestion terrified her even more. She grabbed him tightly and insisted they stay together. No matter how scared she was, she refused to be left alone. Klaus felt a swell of pride. She was truly counting on him. They stepped inside. The cave was damp and suffocatingly dark, the echo of dripping water amplifying every sound. Natalia's imagination ran wild. If something jumped out here, she would completely lose it. Klaus promised again not to leave her. She calmed slightly, until a single cold droplet fell from the ceiling and landed on her. That was the breaking point. With a piercing scream, Natalia panicked. Disoriented and overwhelmed, she bolted blindly into the darkness. Klaus shouted her name, but she was already running deeper inside, consumed by fear. In her frantic escape, she didn't see the edge ahead. What looked like a path was actually a steep drop. Realizing too late that there was a massive hole in the ground, she stumbled over the ledge and fell into the darkness, screaming Klaus's name as she plummeted. After a terrifying descent, everything stopped. Groggy and shaken, Natalia slowly opened her eyes. Klaus was leaning over her, looking deeply relieved. He quickly asked if she was okay. They had somehow fallen together and landed safely. As they sat up, they noticed their surroundings. They were no longer in a narrow cave tunnel, but in a vast underground chamber. Glowing water shimmered softly nearby. Natalia slowly got to her feet, only to gasp when she noticed her clothes were completely soaked. Klaus, relieved she wasn't injured, immediately suggested they head back to the villa before she caught a cold. But Natalia wasn't listening. She stared at the torch in her hand, now extinguished by the water. If the flame had gone out, then what was illuminating the cave? The chamber was still glowing with a brilliant, mysterious light, even though there was no visible source. In a place this deep underground, that made no sense. They stood in silence, taking in their surroundings. As their eyes adjusted, they realized they weren't in an ordinary cave at all. They were standing among ancient submerged ruins. Massive stone pillars rose from the water, worn by time yet still majestic. The entire place felt forgotten by history. Klaus admitted he had never heard of such a place existing within his family's territory. If these were ruins, then they had likely been hidden for centuries. Natalia, however, had stopped walking. Her gaze was fixed on a towering stone statue ahead. There was something strangely familiar about its face. She called Klaus over and, after studying it closely, declared that the statue looked exactly like him. Klaus dismissed it at first, but as he examined the carving, even he couldn't deny the resemblance. The facial features, the posture, it was uncanny. Natalia hurried to the next statue, then another, her shock deepening with each discovery. One resembled Lillian, another looked just like Thomas, and another was unmistakably Tim. It was as if stone replicas of all of them had been placed here long before they were born. Then she noticed the crests carved into the bases of the statues. Each symbol matched the emblems of the 4 great families. A realization dawned on her. They weren't just random figures. These must be the original founders of the 4 great families. Klaus nodded thoughtfully. If that were true, then it wasn't strange that the current descendants resembled them. They were bloodlines connected across generations, but one statue stood apart from the rest. Unlike the others, its base bore no family crest. Natalia stepped closer, confused. If it didn't belong to one of the 4 great families, then the only other possibility would be the royal family. Yet the features didn't match anyone from the royal lineage. Klaus moved beside her, his expression turning serious. After a long moment of silence, he spoke quietly. The statue looked exactly like Natalia. She froze, staring up at the stone face. She felt her breath hitch. The resemblance was undeniable. The same eyes, the same delicate features. It was as if she were looking at herself carved in ancient stone. Her mind struggled to process it. How could a centuries-old statue mirror her so perfectly? Before she could form another thought, sharp mechanical clicks echoed through the chamber. A second later, the ground began to rumble violently. The water churned, pillars trembled, and Natalia cried out in fear. Klaus reacted instantly, pulling her into his arms and shielding her as the ruins shook around them. They clung to each other while the tremors roared through the cavern, the sound of grinding stone filling the air. Then, just as suddenly as it began, everything stopped. The shaking ceased. The water slowly settled. A heavy silence fell over the ruins once more. Klaus frowned and turned toward the pool. Something had changed. The glow within the water was intensifying, growing brighter with every second. He called Natalia's attention to it. From the depths of the shimmering pool, something began to rise. Water parted with a soft splash as a sword slowly emerged into the air. Its blade shone with a powerful, ethereal blue light that reflected off the ancient pillars and illuminated the chamber even more brilliantly than before. The aura surrounding it felt ancient, legendary. Natalia could only stare in stunned disbelief. This was no simple hidden ruin. No ordinary cave. What they had stumbled upon was something far greater than a childish test of courage. It was a secret buried for centuries, and it had just awakened before them. Klaus confirmed immediately that the sword hadn't been there before. If something that noticeable had been floating in the water, he would have seen it at once. Natalia found the entire situation far too suspicious and insisted they should prioritize finding a way out instead of worrying about some mysterious weapon. Panicking slightly, she searched for an exit. Klaus suggested the hole in the ceiling. The same one they had fallen through. Might be their only route back. Climbing up could work, but he hesitated. Since arriving at the villa, he had been struggling to control his powers, which meant using magic to escape wasn't reliable. Natalia's anxiety grew, but Klaus tried to calm her. The statues and architecture clearly proved the ruins were man-made. If someone had built this place, then there had to be a proper exit somewhere. Still, before leaving, he felt they should at least examine the sword. Something about it didn't feel random. Though uneasy, Natalia followed him closer. As they approached the glowing blade, a chilling thought struck her. Swords don't float on water. The realization sent a shiver down her spine. Klaus agreed it was strange, but since the sword had appeared out of nowhere, he decided he had to check it himself. He reached toward the weapon. The moment his hand neared the hilt, a violent burst of yellow energy exploded outward. Klaus was thrown back instantly, shouting in shock. Natalia rushed to him in panic, but he quickly assured her he wasn't hurt. It had only felt like an intense jolt of static electricity, surprising, but not damaging. Natalia stared at the hovering sword with growing dread. Her imagination spiraled. Was it some kind of sword ghost? A possessed weapon? Every possibility felt worse than the last. She suggested they abandon it and leave immediately, but Klaus remained steady. If she was scared, he told her not to force herself. He would handle it. His words struck her pride. She couldn't keep hiding behind him. Calling herself pathetic for being afraid, Natalia suddenly dashed forward before he could stop her. If checking the sword was all it took to end this, she would do it herself. Ignoring Klaus's shout, she grabbed the glowing hilt. Silence. No shock, no explosion. Nothing. Natalia blinked. That was it. Relief flooded her, and she even let out a small laugh at how badly she had panicked. Then she looked down. The sword was gone. Her hand was empty. The laughter died instantly. She turned to Klaus in disbelief and asked if she had really been holding it. He confirmed that she had. That was all the proof she needed. This had to be a cursed ghost sword. Her fear returned tenfold as she imagined it reappearing in the middle of the night to attack her. Near tears, she clung to Klaus dramatically, declaring she would sleep with her own sword from now on. Whether ghost or weapon, she would cut it down herself. Before Klaus could properly respond, a harsh grinding sound echoed through the ruins. Both of them froze. The noise grew louder, scraping through the chamber like shifting stone. Klaus looked around sharply, instincts flaring. A second later, the ground beneath their feet lurched violently. Without hesitation, he grabbed Natalia and pulled her close. And the floor gave way. They were plunged straight back into the churning water with a heavy splash, swallowed once more by the unstable ruins. Klaus immediately pulled Natalia into his arms, shielding her with his body as they braced for impact. After several tense seconds, the tremors finally subsided. Breathing out in relief, Klaus muttered how dangerously close that had been. When they looked up, they saw Tim casually peering down through the broken hole in the ceiling, Mu floating beside him. Completely unfazed by the destruction, he lightly asked if he was interrupting something. Natalia and Klaus could only stare at him in disbelief. In that moment, Klaus realized something important. His powers had returned. He quickly guessed that whatever had been suppressing his magic was connected to the ceiling, and now that it had collapsed, the restriction was gone. As if to prove his timing was perfect, Tim manipulated a massive vine, sending it spiraling down into the chamber so they could climb out. Natalia grabbed onto it, relieved to see him safe above. But that relief instantly turned into fury. The moment they reached the top, Natalia seized Tim and began scolding him without restraint. She demanded that he be more careful when helping people. If Klaus hadn't reacted fast enough, he could have been crushed by falling rocks. Tim shrank under her intense lecture, looking unusually small as he offered a quiet, sincere apology. Later that night, back at the villa, Natalia soaked in a large steaming bath, letting out a long, exhausted sigh. What had started as a simple test of courage had turned into a genuinely life-threatening disaster. She felt both drained and overwhelmed as her thoughts drifted back to the mysterious underground ruins. The place made no sense. Even Tim, who knew the territory well, had never heard of it. The statues and crests clearly connected the chamber to the four great families, yet neither Klaus nor Tim seemed aware of its existence. That alone was unsettling. Perhaps Thomas or Lillian might know something, she thought. But what troubled her most was the final statue. The one without a crest. It didn't belong to the four great families, nor did it resemble royalty. And yet it looked exactly like her. Klaus had said so himself. As she gazed at her reflection in the bathwater, she wondered if she would truly grow into the woman carved in stone. Sinking deeper into the warm water, Natalia groaned in embarrassment as she replayed her behavior in the cave. She had clung to Klaus, screamed in panic, and completely lost control. It was humiliating. Still, she remembered how nervous Klaus had been too, and how determined he looked when he promised not to leave her. He had genuinely wanted to protect her. Quietly, she admitted to herself that he had seemed a little cool. A knock on the bathroom door interrupted her thoughts. Mary, the head maid, gently warned that she had been soaking for too long. Natalia quickly responded that she was coming out. Elsewhere in the villa, Tim sat comfortably at a table eating snacks while Moo munched beside him. With a mischievous grin, he asked Klaus what had happened in the cave. Then, leaning forward, he bluntly questioned whether there had been any progress in Klaus's love life. After all, he had intentionally arranged such an intimate test of courage for them. Tim teased that Natalia must have clung to him the entire time, calling her a total scaredy cat, and asked if she had looked cute. Klaus flushed bright red, guilt washing over him for putting her through such fear. He tried to insist it wasn't the time for that kind of conversation, but under pressure, he reluctantly admitted that yes, she had been cute. Tim didn't stop there. He boldly asked if Klaus had at least managed to steal a kiss. Klaus exploded in embarrassment, stammering that kissing was for grown-ups. Tim immediately shot back that even babies kiss, accusing him of being hopelessly slow. Flustered beyond belief, Klaus snapped at him to stop making fun of him, while Tim simply laughed at his priceless reaction.